Hello and welcome. I'm so glad you've decided to join me tonight. Have you ever wondered what it might feel like to watch the world quietly through falling snow, with only the wind and distant howls for company? Perhaps you've pictured yourself tucked into a warm bed, but out there, across the endless Siberian forests, life continued under a very different rhythm. A rhythm dictated by ice, darkness, and the persistent whisper of survival. Let's take a gentle journey together into that world, where the cold was not just a season but a test, and every choice could mean life or death. In the days before modern comforts, the people of Siberia moved with the land rather than against it. Imagine wide, silent expanses dotted with groves of birch and pine, where snow might fall for days without pause, covering footprints and hiding the faintest signs of life. It was in this landscape that small, resilient tribes carved out their existence. Each family, each band of hunters, had learned the subtle language of the forest, the bend of a tree branch that hinted at a nearby predator, the faint crackle of frozen undergrowth warning of approaching elk. Survival was never random. It was a careful, continuous reading of the world around them. Winter, of course, brought its own trials. The blizzards were not polite interruptions of life. They were sudden, furious storms that could pin a person in place for hours, sometimes days. The elders of the tribe spoke often of the wind as if it were a living creature, one that demanded respect. Huddled inside shelters made of timber, skins, and earth, families would pass the long nights in quiet preparation, repairing tools, tending fires, and whispering stories that carried the weight of generations. In those moments, one could almost feel the tension between vulnerability and resilience, a delicate balance that defined the Siberian way of life. Animals, both prey and predator, were constant companions in this frozen theatre. Wolves, moving in disciplined packs, were feared and admired. A lone hunter might track the footprints of a wolf for hours, learning its habits, anticipating its moves. It was not merely about hunting for food. It was about understanding the dance of life and death, learning from creatures that had thrived in the same harsh conditions for centuries. This mutual awareness shaped human behavior, the construction of traps, the careful selection of paths through the snow, and the design of shelters that could withstand both predator and storm. Inside the huts and temporary camps, warmth came from the fires built carefully to conserve both fuel and heat. Smoke holes were tiny openings in the roofs, allowing smoke to escape while holding the maximum warmth inside. The placement of sleeping mats, furs, and even the bodies of domesticated dogs was deliberate, aimed at creating a shared body heat that could carry a family through nights when the temperature might drop to levels that today would seem unimaginable. Even then, the cold had a rhythm, and people had adapted to its patterns, learning which winds carried frost that burned the skin, and which sheltered hollows allowed snow to drift lightly and silently, almost like a blanket from the sky. Food, of course, was never taken for granted. Hunters and gatherers had to anticipate not only the immediate hunger of the tribe, but the months of winter ahead. Smoked and dried meats, frozen berries, and stored roots formed the backbone of sustenance. Yet there was also a ritual to the process, a mindfulness that reflected a deep understanding that survival depended on respect. Respect for the animal, respect for the land, respect for the cycles of the seasons. Eating was not hurried. It was thoughtful, almost reverent, and around the fire. Stories were shared that preserved knowledge of the forests, the snow, and the creatures that roamed within it. One of the most remarkable aspects of these Siberian tribes was their understanding of movement and concealment. A hunter could cross miles of snow with barely a sound, tracking an elk without alerting it, guided by instincts honed over generations. They learned to read snow not as a flat, uniform surface, but as a text, the indent of a pore, the subtle shift of powder over ice, the way wind reshaped drifts overnight. Every step was intentional, every pause a form of communication with the world. And when the predator came closer, often wolves, occasionally bears, the response was never panic. It was measured, informed, an understanding that reaction and survival were intertwined. Yet survival was not only about technique, it was also about emotion, about psychology. The cold tested patience, courage, and the bonds between people. Families relied on each other not just for warmth and food, but for reassurance, for the stories that carried them through long nights. The elders' tales were more than entertainment. They were lessons in endurance, ethics, and the quiet bravery required to live in a land where the horizon was often obscured by snow and uncertainty. A child listening to these stories learned to recognize fear and respect it, to understand hope and trust it, and to know that each day in winter was both a trial and a triumph. By evening, the camp would settle into a rhythm. Fires flickered low, shadows stretched across firs, and the world outside became a near-silent expanse of white and darkness. Occasionally, a distant howl would remind everyone that they were never truly alone, and yet the sound could also be comforting. A sign that nature was alive, unyielding, yet predictable in its patterns. Sleep came wrapped in layers of warmth, the mind half alert, half drifting, as if the tribe itself exhaled in unison, a communal acknowledgement of having survived another day in a harsh, magnificent world. The beauty of this life lay in its intimacy with nature, in the deep sense of attunement that each person, each family, cultivated. They were not merely surviving, they were participating in the slow, intricate rhythm of the land. Every blizzard endured, every predator avoided, every fire tended was a note in a song older than memory, a song of resilience, adaptation, and quiet courage. And as the nights deepened and the snow continued to fall, the people of Siberia did something remarkable. They dreamed. They dreamed of spring, of movement without resistance, of rivers freed from ice, of green moss and sunlight. These dreams were carried in stories, in laughter, in the small comforts that transformed cold survival into living with purpose. In that sense, the harshness of winter was not only a challenge, it was a teacher, a force that shaped not only bodies, but hearts and minds. The first touch of dawn, pale and grey, would eventually arrive. Smoke from chimneys would rise and curl, animals would stir, and hunters would once again step into the silent forests, tracing paths invisible to the untrained eye, guided by centuries of wisdom passed from parent to child. Each day was a careful negotiation with the elements, a quiet meditation on existence, and a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. The people of Siberia had very simple but effective ways of living in winter. Their homes were small and made to keep them warm. They used wood, animal skins, and sometimes layers of earth to block the cold wind. They would build their shelters near forests or rivers, where it was easier to find food and water. Inside, they made a small fire for warmth. Smoke from the fire went out through a small hole in the roof. The fire also gave light at night and helped cook food. They slept on animal furs. These furs kept them warm even when it was very cold outside. People often slept close together. Body heat from each person helped everyone stay warmer. Dogs were also part of the household. They helped guard the camp and sometimes shared their warmth. Sleeping in groups and with animals was an important way to survive long, freezing nights. Food was very important in winter. Hunting and gathering were the main ways people got food. They hunted animals like deer, elk, and sometimes smaller animals. Fish from rivers and lakes was also important. Berries, roots, and other plants were gathered in the warmer months and stored for winter. People often dried or smoked meat so it would last longer. They also froze food naturally in the cold. Food storage was a careful task because running out of food in winter could be dangerous. Hunting was not easy in Siberia. Hunters had to move quietly in the snow. They learned to follow animal tracks without making noise. Wolves, bears, and other predators were always nearby. People had to be careful. They used traps and spears, and sometimes bows and arrows. Hunting required patience. Hunters could follow a trail for hours, waiting for the right moment. It was not just about skill, but also about watching and understanding the environment. Animals in Siberia were not only food. They were part of life. Wolves were dangerous but also respected. Bears were strong and had to be avoided carefully. Even smaller animals could cause trouble if people were not careful. Every animal left tracks in the snow, and people learned to read these tracks. Reading tracks helped them find food and stay safe. This skill was taught from parents to children. People also had to prepare for storms. Blizzards could come suddenly. They could last for hours or even days. When a storm started, people would gather inside their homes. They made sure the fire was strong and that everyone had enough food. Sometimes they would block doors or holes to keep the wind out. Staying safe in storms required planning and teamwork. The day life of the tribe followed the seasons. In winter, the focus was on survival, warmth, food, and safety. During warmer months, people prepared for winter. They hunted and gathered more food than they needed immediately. They repaired tools and shelters. They taught children skills that would help them survive. This cycle repeated every year. It was simple, but it was effective. Life in Siberia required people to be careful, patient, and aware. They paid attention to small signs in nature, a change in the wind, an animal track, or the sound of snow underfoot. These small details could make a difference between staying safe or getting into danger. People developed routines to watch for these details. Families worked together. Everyone had a role. Children learned by watching adults. Even simple tasks like stacking firewood or checking traps were lessons in survival. Winter was also a time for stories. Inside the shelters, people told stories about animals, ancestors, and past hunts. These stories helped children learn important skills and rules. They also kept people calm during long nights. Listening to stories while sitting near the fire helped everyone feel safe and connected. The social structure of the tribes helped survival too. People shared food and helped each other during storms or illness. Strong families and communities could survive much better than individuals. Cooperation was a key part of life. People trusted each other and depended on each other. This trust was built over many years and was reinforced through shared work and shared challenges. Hunting, gathering, and caring for animals were daily activities. People also used natural resources carefully. They made clothes from animal skins, which were warm and durable. They used wood for fire and shelter, but only as much as they needed. Respecting the land was important because if they used too much, food and resources would become scarce. Children learned by doing. They practiced simple tasks first, like gathering firewood, watching the animals, or helping cook. Older children learned to track animals and use tools. They learned how to recognize safe places and dangerous places in the forest. Learning these skills slowly helped children survive when they became adults. Even small tools were important. Knives, scrapers, and fishing hooks were made from bones, stone, or wood. Spears and arrows were made for hunting and protection. Tools had to be strong and durable. They were repaired when needed. People often carried spare tools with them because losing a tool could mean losing a meal. During winter, daily life moved slowly. People had to conserve energy. Walking in deep snow or carrying heavy loads used a lot of energy. People moved carefully. They also rested when they could. Fires were kept low to save wood, but still warm enough for comfort. Nights were long, and sleeping well was important for staying healthy and strong. Water was another important part of life. Rivers and lakes often froze, but people found ways to get water. Sometimes they melted snow or ice. Drinking water had to be clean to avoid illness. Even small mistakes could make someone sick in winter when resources were already limited. People also protected themselves from predators. Wolves could attack animals or humans. Bears could be dangerous if surprised. People used fences, fires, and watch animals like dogs to stay safe. Hunters also carried weapons when they went out. Camps were often built in places that were easier to defend. Safety was always a priority. Even with all these dangers, people of Siberia adapted. They learned to live with cold, snow, and predators. They learned to read signs in nature. They worked together and shared knowledge. This made it possible for them to survive in one of the hardest environments on Earth. Seasons changed slowly. Winter gave way to spring, and the snow slowly melted. Rivers and lakes opened. Animals moved and changed behavior. People followed these changes carefully. They moved to find food, repaired shelters damaged by winter, and prepared for the warmer months. This rhythm of change helped them survive year after year. The life of a Siberian tribe was simple but full of careful decisions. Every day required attention to weather, animals, food, and community. People were not hurried. They observed, planned, and acted with patience. They had to think about tomorrow, next week, and the next season. This long-term planning was necessary because mistakes could be dangerous or deadly. Even small habits mattered. People cleaned their homes, repaired clothing, and checked food stores. They observed animal tracks daily. Children helped and learned by observing adults. Small actions, repeated over time, created a pattern of survival that lasted for generations. In winter, the nights were long. Darkness came early, and it lasted many hours. People spent this time near the fire. They told stories, repaired tools, and rested. They also planned the next day carefully. What food would they hunt or gather? Which paths were safe to travel? Which tools needed repair? These questions guided daily life. People also observed the sky. Stars helped them find directions when moving in snow-covered forests. The moonlight sometimes allowed travel at night. They learned to use natural signs to guide them, rather than relying on maps or instruments. This knowledge was passed down from elders to children. Animals were an important source of knowledge too. By watching their behavior, humans learned where food could be found or where danger might come from. Wolves, deer, birds, and fish all gave information. Observing them carefully helped people survive. Families were at the center of Siberian life. Everyone had responsibilities. Adults hunted, gathered, or repaired shelters. Children learned and helped. Elders guided the community, shared knowledge, and told stories. Working together kept the tribe strong. Even during storms, life continued. Fires were maintained, food was cooked, and children were kept safe. People adapted to snow and ice. Tools and clothing were adjusted as needed. Every decision was about survival, but also about comfort and warmth when possible. People moved carefully through snow. They wore thick clothes made from animal skins. Boots were made to protect feet from frost. Gloves and hats kept hands and heads warm. Staying dry was as important as staying warm. Wet clothes could be dangerous in freezing temperatures. Hunting in winter required special skills. Animals left tracks in the snow. People learned to recognize which tracks were fresh. They learned how animals moved and where they would go. Hunters could follow tracks for hours. They moved quietly and slowly to avoid being seen. Fishing was done through ice in rivers and lakes. People cut holes in the ice and used hooks or spears. Fish were stored for winter, either frozen or dried. This provided important food during harsh months. Food was shared carefully. Everyone got enough to survive. Stronger or skilled hunters sometimes gave food to those who could not hunt. Sharing strengthened the community. Everyone depended on each other. Children learned many skills by watching adults. They learned to track animals, build shelters, and make tools. They learned about plants, berries, and roots. These lessons were important for survival. Every child practiced before they hunted or gathered alone. Clothing was very important. People used furs from animals like deer, elk, and foxes. Clothes were layered to trap warmth. Clothes were repaired when torn. People knew how to make clothing for maximum protection from cold and wind. Even small shelters were important during storms. People built temporary shelters while traveling. They used snow, branches, and skins. These shelters protected them from wind and predators. They were simple but effective. Life required constant attention. People observed animals, weather, and other signs. They planned their activities carefully. Every day had a rhythm of work, rest, and observation. This rhythm helped them survive winter. The people of Siberia understood that surviving winter required not only physical preparation, but also mental focus. Long nights in cold shelters could feel endless, but they found ways to stay calm and attentive. Around the fire, elders would tell stories not just for entertainment, but as lessons. These stories taught children how to track animals, how to predict the weather, and how to find food when the snow covered everything. They also taught caution, how to avoid danger from predators, falling branches, or unstable ice. Even small routines mattered. Each morning, people checked their firewood supply. They made sure the fire was ready before leaving the shelter. Children helped carry small bundles of wood from nearby forests. Every day, the tribe needed to make enough firewood to last through the cold hours of the night. Wood was also needed for cooking. Food had to be heated to prevent freezing, and some foods were easier to eat when slightly warm. Hunting in the snow required patience. Hunters often went alone or in small groups to avoid scaring animals. They followed tracks carefully, paying attention to wind direction. A strong wind could carry human scent to animals, causing them to flee. Hunters also observed the behavior of birds. Birds would sometimes gather in areas where food was available or fly away when predators were near. Watching these small signs helped hunters find prey and avoid danger. Hunting tools were very important. Spears, bows, and arrows were crafted with care. Knives and scrapers were sharpened before each hunting trip. Tools could break, so hunters always carried spares. Children learned how to make small tools from wood or bone. Over time, they gained skill and precision, which was essential for survival. Food preservation was also essential. Fresh meat was often frozen immediately after a hunt. Some meat was dried over a low fire to remove moisture, which prevented spoilage. Fish was sometimes salted and stored in snow to keep it safe. Berries, roots, and other plants were stored in containers made from bark or skins. Planning food storage carefully was vital, because running out of food could be life-threatening. Siberian families also relied on domesticated animals. Dogs were especially important. They helped with hunting, guarded the camp, and provided warmth. Some dogs were trained to pull sleds, carrying food, firewood, or children. People took great care of their dogs, feeding them regularly and keeping them close during storms. Dogs were partners in survival. Children played an important role in daily life. While adults hunted, gathered, or repaired shelters, children helped with smaller tasks. They carried firewood, fetched water, or checked traps. They observed adults closely to learn survival skills. Learning by doing was how knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. Children who practiced these tasks regularly became skilled hunters, gatherers, and caretakers. Even clothing required attention. People layered their clothing to trap warmth. Gloves, boots, hats, and coats were all made from animal skins. These skins were treated to resist water and wind. Repairing clothing was a daily task. A tear in a boot or a glove could be dangerous in extreme cold. People learned to sew and patch clothing carefully, and children practiced these skills early. During storms, people adjusted their routines. Travel outside the shelter was minimized. People stayed inside and tended fires. Food was rationed carefully. Any movement outside had to be planned with safety in mind. Even small missteps in deep snow could lead to frostbite or injury. Survival meant patience and careful observation. The landscape was always changing. Snowdrifts could block paths. Rivers froze and sometimes cracked unexpectedly. People had to learn how to move safely over ice. Some areas of the forest were safer than others during winter, and these patterns were known from experience. Elders remembered past winters and guided younger hunters to safer locations. This knowledge was invaluable. Water sources were carefully monitored. Rivers, lakes, and springs often froze. People melted snow for drinking water when needed. They had to make sure the water was clean to avoid sickness. Water was also needed for cooking, and sometimes for preserving food. Every source of water was important, and people learned to manage it carefully. Predators were always a concern. Wolves, bears, and sometimes lynx roamed the forests. People avoided encounters by observing animal tracks and behaviors. Hunters carried weapons to protect themselves if necessary. Camps were placed in areas that could be defended, often with natural barriers like hills, thick trees, or rivers. Dogs and sometimes even domesticated reindeer helped alert people to danger. Daily life followed a rhythm. In the morning, people tended fires and checked food supplies. Hunters and gatherers set out to find food. Children helped with smaller tasks. Adults repaired tools, clothing, and shelters. Even small tasks repeated every day contributed to survival. The day ended with everyone gathering near the fire. They rested, ate, told stories, and planned for the next day. This rhythm created stability and safety. During long nights, storytelling was central. Stories passed down lessons, remembered past hunts, and shared warnings about dangers. Elders told stories about predators, weather patterns, and important locations in the forest. Children listened carefully. The stories helped them remember what to do and what to avoid. This oral knowledge was critical for survival. People also observed the stars and sky. Stars helped guide travelers across snowy landscapes. The moon provided light at night, making it easier to move or track animals. People learned to read weather signs from the sky. Changes in wind, clouds, and moonlight helped predict storms or dangerous conditions. This skill helped prevent accidents and improved hunting success. Food distribution in the tribe was careful. Everyone received enough to survive. Hunters often shared food with those who could not hunt, such as elders or young children. Food sharing strengthened bonds in the community. People depended on each other. Cooperation was essential for survival. Even small tasks were important. Collecting snow for water, sharpening tools, repairing clothing, and checking traps were all essential. Every task contributed to survival. Children learned these tasks by doing them repeatedly. Adults monitored and guided their work, correcting mistakes gently. Through practice, children developed the skills they would need as adults. Fire was central to survival. Fires provided warmth, light, and a way to cook food. Fires were maintained carefully. People learned to start a fire in cold, windy conditions. They learned which wood burned best and how to keep a fire from going out. Fires were also used to smoke meat for preservation. A small mistake with fire could have serious consequences, so it was always managed with care. Traveling in winter required preparation. Snow could be deep, and hidden ice could be dangerous. People used snowshoes made from wood and animal hide to walk more easily. Sleds pulled by dogs or reindeer helped transport heavy loads. People planned trips carefully, considering weather, food supplies, and safety. Travel was slow but deliberate to avoid exhaustion or injury. Even small shelters during travel were important. Temporary shelters were made from branches, snow, or animal skins. These shelters protected travelers from wind and predators. Even a short stay in the cold without shelter could be dangerous. People carried materials to build these shelters whenever they traveled far from the main camp. Observation was constant. People watched animals, weather, and each other. Wolves and bears were studied to understand patterns. Snow and ice were observed to detect weak spots or hidden dangers. Elders taught younger members how to read the landscape carefully. Knowledge of the environment was essential for survival. Winter life required mental focus as well. Long nights and cold conditions could be tiring and stressful. People kept busy with necessary tasks, shared stories, and worked together. Mental alertness was important to avoid accidents and maintain safety. Calmness and patience helped people survive in extreme conditions. Social bonds were strengthened by shared tasks. Everyone had responsibilities. Adults hunted and repaired, children helped and learned, and elders guided and instructed. Cooperation ensured survival. People who worked together successfully could endure harsh conditions more easily. Trust was built through daily effort and shared experiences. Even simple tasks were repeated daily. Collecting wood, feeding animals, checking fire, and preparing food all became routines. These routines reduced mistakes and ensured efficiency. By following routines, the tribe could survive harsh conditions more easily. Children learned discipline and skill through daily routines. They observed adults, repeated tasks, and gradually became competent. They learned to track animals, make tools, and navigate snow-covered forests. This gradual learning prepared them to survive independently when they became adults. Food security was always a concern. People planned meals carefully. They ate enough to maintain energy but not waste food. They monitored supplies and rationed when necessary. Storage methods like drying, smoking, and freezing helped preserve food. Careful planning ensured survival throughout the winter. Even clothing required daily attention. Furs and skins were repaired and adjusted. Layers were checked for warmth. Wet clothing was dried near the fire. Clothing was essential for protection against frostbite and hypothermia. Proper clothing could make the difference between life and death. People also maintained tools daily. Knives, spears, bows, and arrows were sharpened and repaired. Broken tools were replaced if possible. Carrying spare tools was standard. Tools were essential for hunting, cooking, and building shelters. Without tools, survival became much more difficult. Hunting in Siberia was both skill and patience. Hunters spent hours tracking animals through snow and ice. They looked for footprints, broken branches, or disturbed snow. These signs told them where animals had moved and what kind of animal was. Hunters followed these tracks carefully, often moving very slowly to avoid being noticed. Animals like deer and elk were very cautious, so hunters needed to be quiet and deliberate. Wind was an important factor in hunting. Humans have a scent that animals can detect. Hunters paid attention to the direction of the wind so that their scent would not reach the prey. Sometimes they would crawl or hide behind snowdrifts or trees to remain unseen. Tracking animals required knowledge of their habits. Hunters learned where animals went to find food, water, or shelter. This knowledge was passed down from adults to children. Weapons were carefully prepared for hunting. Spears were sharpened, bows and arrows were checked for cracks, and knives were made sharp. Hunters carried extra arrows or spears in case some broke. Tools were often made from wood, bone, or stone. Using tools effectively required practice. Children learned these skills slowly by practicing with safe, small versions before handling real weapons. Traps were also used to catch smaller animals. Snares, pits, and simple mechanical traps were set in places where animals were likely to pass. Traps allowed people to catch food even when they could not hunt actively. Checking traps daily was important to make sure no food was wasted and to avoid harming unintended animals. Fishing in winter required preparation and patience. Rivers and lakes often froze, but people knew how to cut holes in the ice. They used hooks, spears, or nets to catch fish under the ice. Fish were an important part of the diet because they provided protein and fat needed to survive the cold. Caught fish were frozen, dried, or smoked for storage. Food preparation was careful and methodical. Meat was cut into pieces and preserved. Some meat was stored frozen in snow. Other meat was smoked over low fire to last longer. Plants, roots, and berries were also stored for winter. Food was rationed to last until the next season. Sharing food was essential. Hunters shared their catch with elders, children, and people who could not hunt. Traveling in snow was slow and tiring. Snowshoes helped distribute weight and prevented sinking into deep snow. Sleds pulled by dogs or reindeer carried heavy loads, including food, firewood, and sometimes children. Travelers planned routes carefully to avoid dangerous ice, steep hills, or areas where predators were active. Traveling was done in daylight whenever possible, but experienced hunters sometimes moved at night using stars and moonlight for guidance. Predators were a constant concern. Wolves often hunted in packs and could threaten people and animals. Bears were dangerous if approached unexpectedly. People learned to read animal tracks to avoid encounters. Dogs were trained to alert camp to nearby predators. Camps were often built near natural barriers like cliffs, rivers, or dense forests to help protect against attacks. Shelters were carefully maintained. Temporary shelters were built when traveling, using branches, snow, or animal skins. These provided protection from wind, snow, and predators. Permanent shelters near camps were made from wood, furs, and earth. Doors and entrances were reinforced. Smoke holes allowed fire to burn without letting too much cold in. Fires were central to survival. They provided warmth, light, and a way to cook and preserve food. Maintaining a fire required skill. Wood had to be dry and stacked carefully. Fire could go out in strong wind or heavy snow, so people had to be attentive. Sometimes multiple small fires were built for warmth and cooking, and embers were preserved overnight to make restarting easier. Water was essential. Frozen rivers or lakes required melting snow or ice for drinking. Water had to be clean to prevent illness. People sometimes boiled water or melted ice near the fire. Careful attention to water sources helped prevent dehydration or sickness during winter. Observing the environment was constant. People watched snow, ice, wind, clouds, and animal behavior. Snowdrifts could hide dangerous terrain or block paths. Ice could break unexpectedly. Animals moving differently could indicate predators nearby. Paying attention to small changes helped people avoid accidents and find food. Children learned survival skills slowly. They observed adults, practiced tasks, and were guided carefully. They learned to read animal tracks, use tools, navigate snowy terrain, and manage fire. Skills were reinforced through repetition. By the time they became adults, they were able to hunt, travel, and survive independently. Daily routines were important for survival. Each day included checking food and water, maintaining fire, inspecting shelters, repairing clothing and tools, and monitoring the environment. Following routines helped people stay safe and manage their energy efficiently. Repetition made tasks automatic, reducing mistakes. Clothing was critical for staying warm. People wore layers made from animal skins. Boots, gloves, and hats were essential. Clothing was repaired immediately if torn or damaged. Wet clothing was changed and dried near the fire. Proper clothing prevented frostbite and hypothermia. Communication within the tribe was important. People warned each other about storms, predators, or dangerous terrain. Hunters shared information about animal movement. Elders guided younger members with advice on what to do and where to go. Clear communication helped the tribe survive and avoid unnecessary risks. Sleeping arrangements were designed for warmth. People slept close together with animal furs under and over them. Dogs often slept with humans or near the shelter to provide extra warmth and alert to danger. Sleeping in a group helped conserve energy and keep everyone safe. Winter storms required careful preparation. People secured shelters, ensured fires were strong, and stockpiled food. Travel was avoided unless necessary. Storms could last hours or days, and survival depended on careful planning. Experienced elders guided the tribe through difficult weather. Even small tasks mattered. Collecting wood, preparing food, repairing tools and clothing, feeding animals, and maintaining shelters were all essential. Children practiced these tasks to learn responsibility and skill. Every small task contributed to safety, warmth, and survival. Hunting in deep snow required strength and skill. Hunters moved carefully to avoid tiring themselves. They used snowshoes, sleds, and dogs to help. They observed animal tracks, wind direction, and terrain. They also anticipated how animals would move, where they would hide, and where they would find food. Patience was essential. Fishing through ice required patience and attention. Holes had to be cut carefully. Lines or spears were checked frequently. Fish movement was observed to know the best time to catch them. Caught fish were stored immediately to prevent spoilage. Traps were maintained and checked daily. Any animals caught were used for food, clothing, or tools. Traps were set carefully in areas where animals were likely to pass. Knowledge of animal behavior and movement was necessary to place traps effectively. Sharing food was a central part of social life. Everyone received enough to survive. Hunters gave food to those who could not hunt. Elders, children, and sick people were prioritized. Sharing strengthened social bonds and ensured everyone survived. Cooperation was essential for life in extreme conditions. People observed the stars for navigation. Snow-covered landscapes could be confusing. Stars helped travelers maintain direction during long journeys. The moon provided light at night. Observing the sky also helped predict weather changes, such as storms or temperature shifts. Even small mistakes could be dangerous. Falling through ice, getting lost in deep snow, or misjudging a predator could lead to injury or death. People learned from experience and from the stories of elders. Caution and careful observation were taught from childhood. Shelters were often built in locations that offered natural protection. Hills, forests, and rivers provided barriers from wind, snow, and predators. Temporary shelters were built during travel. Permanent shelters were reinforced with wood, earth, and furs. Maintaining shelters was a daily task. Fire was used in multiple ways. It provided warmth, light, cooking, and a way to preserve food. Smoke from fires also kept some insects away. Fires were maintained carefully, and embers were preserved to restart if necessary. A fire was never left unattended. Clothing, food, water, fire, and shelter formed the foundation of survival. Each of these elements required daily attention. People monitored all aspects carefully. Daily routines ensured that these needs were met. Children observed adults carefully and practiced skills gradually. They learned to track animals, maintain fire, repair clothing, and use tools. They learned to navigate snowy forests and recognize safe areas. Skills were repeated daily until mastered. Animals were carefully watched for survival information. Wolves, bears, deer, and birds all provided clues about food, danger, and weather. Understanding animal behavior helped people predict danger and locate resources. Observing animals was a lifelong skill. The Siberian people knew that predators were always nearby. Wolves hunted in packs and could follow humans or domesticated animals. Bears were large, strong, and sometimes unpredictable. Even smaller predators, like lynx or foxes, could threaten smaller animals or damage traps. Avoiding predators required careful planning and constant attention to surroundings. People learned to read tracks in the snow. Wolf tracks were different from deer tracks or bear tracks. Experienced hunters could tell the size, speed, and direction of animals from footprints. This knowledge helped them avoid dangerous animals and find prey. Tracking was a skill learned over many years. Children began with small tasks, like noticing which way a squirrel ran, and gradually moved to larger, more dangerous animals. Wolves often traveled in packs, so hunters paid attention to how many tracks were present. A single wolf could usually be avoided, but a pack could be dangerous if approached. People used fire dogs and loud noise to keep wolves away from camps. Sometimes wolves were trapped or hunted to reduce the threat to animals and humans. Bears were most dangerous during winter when they emerged from hibernation unexpectedly. People avoided areas where bears had been seen or where tracks indicated a recent presence. Large fires around the camp could discourage bears from coming too close. Hunters also carried spears or axes for defense, though avoiding confrontation was always preferred. Even birds provided important information. Birds would react to predators flying away or calling loudly. Watching birds could warn people of wolves, bears, or other danger in the area. People learned to observe subtle movements in the forest, like a rustle in the branches or disturbed snow. These signs often meant a predator was nearby. Dogs were essential for predator detection. They were trained to bark at unusual sounds or movement. A dog could alert people before a predator arrived, giving the tribe time to react. Dogs also helped during hunting and could pull sleds with supplies or food. Their loyalty and keen senses made them vital partners in survival. Camps were carefully chosen to reduce predator risk. Natural barriers like rivers, cliffs, or thick forests provided safety. Shelters were often built on slightly elevated ground to prevent snow accumulation and make it easier to see approaching animals. Temporary shelters during travel were also placed strategically, often near water or forest edges where visibility was better. People moved quietly in winter to avoid attracting predators. Even small sounds could alert a wolf or bear. Walking carefully on snow and using natural cover helped people stay safe. Children were taught to move silently and to recognize signs of predator presence. These lessons began at a very young age, reinforcing careful observation and awareness. Nighttime was particularly dangerous. Darkness made it harder to see predators. Fires were maintained to provide light and warmth. Dogs were kept close to the shelter, and people slept in groups to provide extra protection. Some families kept small watch shifts, where 1 or 2 people remained alert while others slept. This system reduced the risk of surprise attacks. Traveling long distances in winter required careful preparation. Deep snow, ice, and storms could make travel difficult and dangerous. People carried snowshoes or skis to move more easily. Sleds pulled by dogs or reindeer carried heavy loads like food, firewood, and equipment. Travel routes were planned to avoid dangerous terrain, thin ice, or areas known for predator activity. Food and water were always carried in sufficient quantities during travel. Hunters carried dried meat, fish, and berries. Snow or ice could be melted for water. Travelers also carried spare clothing and furs to stay warm. Preparing for emergencies was essential. Even a short delay caused by weather could become dangerous without proper supplies. Temporary shelters were built during long journeys. These could be made from branches, snow, or animal skins. People would clear a small area of snow, build walls with branches, and cover them with furs to block wind and retain warmth. Fires were built carefully, using dry wood whenever possible. Shelters were often placed near natural barriers for protection from wind and predators. People traveled slowly in winter to conserve energy. Walking in deep snow was exhausting, and moving too quickly could lead to fatigue or accidents. Hunters and gatherers planned their pace according to distance, terrain, and weather. Even small mistakes could be dangerous, so attention to detail was essential. Reading the weather was a critical skill. Sudden storms could appear without warning. People observed clouds, wind patterns, and changes in temperature. Animals often reacted before humans noticed a storm. Observing animal behavior helped people anticipate weather changes and make decisions about shelter or travel. Children learned these survivals gradually. They observed adults, practiced simple tasks, and were guided carefully. Skills included tracking animals, preparing food, maintaining fire, repairing clothing, and navigating terrain. Over time, children became competent and independent. Skills were reinforced through repetition and observation. Community cooperation was essential for survival. Everyone had responsibilities. Adults hunted, gathered, repaired shelters, and prepared food. Children assisted and learned. Elders provided guidance, shared knowledge, and told stories. Shared work ensured that the tribe could survive even the harshest winters. Food security required careful planning. People stored large amounts of food during warmer months to last through winter. Hunters dried or smoked meat, preserved fish, and stored berries and roots. Food was rationed carefully, and everyone received enough to survive. Sharing food reinforced trust and social bonds. Clothing and equipment maintenance was a daily task. Furs and skins were repaired, shoes were checked, and tools were sharpened. Wet or damaged clothing was fixed immediately. Maintaining these items prevented frostbite, injury, and other risks. Attention to detail was vital for survival. Fires were maintained continuously. People kept embers to restart fires quickly. Multiple fires were sometimes built for warmth, cooking, and preservation. Fire was also used to keep predators away from shelters and camps. Careful management of fire was an essential survival skill. Observation of nature was constant. People watched snowdrifts, ice, wind, and animal behavior. Subtle signs could indicate danger or opportunity. Even small observations, like the direction of snow movement or the pattern of animal tracks, could make the difference between safety and risk. Hunting strategies were carefully developed. Hunters learned how animals moved, where they fed, and how they reacted to predators. They planned approaches to minimize noise and avoid being seen. Tracking animals could take hours or days. patience and careful observation were more important than speed or strength, traps were placed strategically. Small animals like rabbits, foxes, or birds were caught using snares, pits, or mechanical devices. Checking traps daily ensured that food was not wasted. Knowledge of animal habits was essential to place traps effectively. Traps provided supplemental food and materials for clothing and tools. Fishing was done carefully during winter. Ice had to be cut without causing cracks that could endanger people. Holes were made in the ice, and lines or spears were used to catch fish below. Timing and observation were key, as fish moved slowly in cold water. Fish was preserved immediately by freezing, drying, or smoking. Water sources were monitored constantly. Frozen rivers, lakes, or ponds required melting ice or snow. Clean water was essential for survival. Contaminated water could cause sickness and weaken people in extreme cold. Access to safe water influenced where shelters and camps were placed. Travel routes were planned with care. Deep snow, rivers, ice, and forests required careful navigation. People used natural landmarks, stars, and animal trails to guide their movement. Experienced hunters and elders provided guidance to ensure safety. Travel was slow, deliberate, and measured to conserve energy and reduce risk. Predator avoidance was a constant concern. Wolves, bears, and lynx were monitored by observing tracks and behavior. Camps were located to reduce risk. Dogs and fire were used to alert and protect against predators. Movement was quiet and careful. People always prepared for the possibility of encounters. Daily routines were crucial. Checking food and water, tending fires, repairing clothing and tools, and monitoring the environment were repeated every day. Routines ensured efficiency, safety, and survival. Repetition reinforced knowledge and skill. Children learned by participating in these routines and observing adults. Sleeping arrangements were designed for warmth and safety. People slept close together using animal furs to conserve heat. Dogs often slept with humans to provide warmth and alert to predators. Shifts were sometimes taken to maintain vigilance during the night. Community structure was built around survival. Everyone had a role. Adults hunted and gathered, children assisted and learned, and elders guided and instructed. Cooperation, trust, and shared effort ensured the tribe's safety and stability. Social bonds strengthened through shared work, storytelling, and protection. Food sharing was central to community life. Hunters provided food for those who could not hunt. Elders, children, and sick people were prioritized. Sharing reinforced trust and strengthened social cohesion. Cooperation increased the tribe's chances of survival in harsh conditions. Winter in Siberia was long, cold, and often unpredictable. People learned to plan their days carefully to survive. Each day had a pattern. Morning began with checking fire, food, and water. Families made sure that everyone was fed and warm. Children helped with smaller tasks like carrying firewood, fetching water, or cleaning shelters. Adults prepared for hunting, fishing, or gathering food, and repaired tools, clothing, and shelters. Elders advised on routes, weather, and safety. Hunting required skill and preparation. Hunters studied animal behavior, tracks, and feeding patterns. They used bows, arrows, spears, and knives, all carefully maintained. Hunters wore warm, layered clothing made from animal skins. Snowshoes or skis helped them move quietly over deep snow. Traveling too quickly could scare animals away, so hunters moved slowly and deliberately. Patience was as important as skill. Tracking animals was an essential skill. Hunters followed footprints, broken branches, and signs of feeding. Different animals left distinct tracks. Experienced hunters could tell not only the type of animal, but its size, direction, and speed. They learned to predict where an animal might go next. This knowledge was passed from adults to children, starting with small observations and gradually increasing in difficulty. Wind was a critical factor in hunting. Animals have keen senses, including smell. Hunters observed the wind direction carefully so that their scent would not reach the prey. They sometimes hid behind snowdrifts, trees, or terrain to remain undetected. Hunters also observed animal behavior to know when to move closer or wait. Timing was crucial, and rushing often meant failure. Fishing during winter required patience and preparation. Rivers and lakes often froze completely. Hunters cut holes in the ice to reach the water below. They used hooks, spears, or nets to catch fish. Observing fish movement was important, as fish were less active in very cold water. Fish was preserved immediately through freezing, drying, or smoking. This food was critical for nutrition during long winters. Traps were another important tool for survival. Small animals like rabbits, foxes, or birds were caught using snares, pits, or simple mechanical traps. Traps had to be checked daily to prevent losing food or harming unintended animals. Placement of traps required knowledge of animal behavior, paths, and feeding areas. Properly set traps provided both food and materials for clothing and tools. Water was carefully managed. Frozen rivers, lakes, or ponds required melting ice or snow for drinking. Water had to be clean to avoid illness. Boiling or filtering water was sometimes necessary. Access to safe water determined where temporary or permanent shelters were located. People knew to carry extra water during travel and keep it insulated to prevent freezing. Travel in winter was challenging. Deep snow, ice, and storms made movement difficult. People traveled using snowshoes, skis, or sleds pulled by dogs or reindeer. Sleds carried food, firewood, tools, or children. Routes were carefully planned to avoid hazards like thin ice, steep hills, or predator territories. Travel required careful attention to energy conservation, as moving through snow consumed more calories. Temporary shelters were built during travel to protect from cold, wind, and predators. These shelters were made from snow, branches, or animal skins. People cleared an area of snow, built walls with branches, and covered them with furs. Fires were built inside or nearby, and shelters were placed near natural barriers whenever possible. Properly built shelters could make the difference between surviving a night in the cold or facing danger. Predator avoidance was a constant concern. Wolves, bears, and lynx were monitored closely. Tracking their footprints and observing their behavior helped people avoid encounters. Camps were located near natural barriers and built for defense. Dogs alerted people to nearby predators. Fires and noise were used to deter predators. Careful observation and caution were essential. Nighttime was particularly dangerous. Darkness made it harder to see predators or hazards. Fires were maintained for warmth and light. Dogs stayed close to the shelter, and people sometimes took turns keeping watch. Sleep was important, but vigilance ensured safety. Children learned survival gradually. They observed adults, assisted in tasks, and practiced simple skills. Children learned to track animals, maintain fire, repair clothing, and use tools. They learned to navigate forests and ice safely. Gradually, children became independent hunters, gatherers, and travelers. Skills were repeated daily to ensure mastery. Community cooperation was essential for survival. Everyone had responsibilities. Adults hunted, gathered, repaired tools and shelters, and prepared food. Children assisted and learned. Elders guided, shared knowledge, and told stories. Cooperation ensured that the tribe could survive even the harshest conditions. Shared tasks strengthened social bonds and increased safety. Food management was critical. People stored large amounts of food during warmer months to last through winter. Hunters preserved meat by drying or smoking it. Fish was frozen or dried. Berries, roots, and plants were stored carefully. Food was rationed to last until the next season. Everyone in the community received enough to survive. Sharing food strengthened trust and cooperation. Clothing and equipment maintenance was daily work. Furs, skins, shoes, and gloves were repaired as needed. Tools were sharpened and checked for cracks or damage. Proper maintenance prevented frostbite, injury, and other dangers. Small oversights could be dangerous in extreme cold. Fire was maintained constantly. Fires provided warmth, light, cooking, and food preservation. Fires also kept predators away from shelters and camps. Embers were preserved overnight to restart fires quickly. Fires were never left unattended, as losing warmth could be life-threatening. Observation of nature was continuous. People watched snow, ice, wind, animal behavior, and terrain. Subtle changes could indicate danger or opportunity. Snowdrifts could hide hazards, thin ice could be fatal, and animal behavior often predicted weather changes. Paying attention to details ensured safety and increased efficiency in hunting and travel. Hunting strategies were carefully developed. Hunters learned where animals fed, rested, or traveled. They anticipated animal movement to increase success. Tracking and patience were more important than speed or strength. Hunters adapted to changing conditions, snow depth, and predator presence. Success required careful planning, observation, and skill. Traps were strategically placed to catch small animals. Hunters monitored trap locations daily to prevent loss. Traps provided food, clothing materials, and tools. Knowledge of animal behavior was essential for effective trap placement. Fishing through ice required careful attention. Ice holes were cut safely to prevent injury. Lines, hooks, and spears were monitored constantly. Fish movement was observed to know the best times for catching. Fish was preserved immediately through freezing, drying, or smoking. Water management was crucial. Frozen sources required melting ice or snow. Clean water prevented illness and dehydration. People carried extra water when traveling and stored it to prevent freezing. Access to water influenced camp placement. Travel routes were carefully chosen. Deep snow, ice, forests, and predators influenced path selection. Natural landmarks, stars, and animal trails guided navigation. Elders and experienced hunters led younger members to avoid hazards. Travel was slow and deliberate to conserve energy. Predator avoidance strategies were essential. Tracking footprints, observing animal behavior, and choosing safe shelter locations reduced risk. Dogs, fire, and noise provided defense. Movement was cautious and deliberate. Daily routines ensured survival. Checking food, water, fire, clothing, tools, and shelter every day reduced risk and maintained efficiency. Repetition built skill and habit, ensuring that everyone knew their responsibilities. Children learned through observation and practice. Sleeping arrangements were organized for safety and warmth. People slept close together on animal furs. Dogs often slept near or with humans. Watch shifts were sometimes used to maintain alertness during the night. Proper sleeping arrangements helped conserve energy and protect against predators. Community structure supported survival. Everyone had a role. Adults hunted, gathered, repaired, and prepared food. Children assisted and learned. Elders guided and taught essential knowledge. Cooperation ensured the tribe could survive winter conditions. Food sharing reinforced social bonds. Hunters gave food to elders, children, and those unable to hunt. Sharing created trust and strengthened the community. Cooperation increased the likelihood of surviving harsh conditions. As winter began to recede, the Siberian people remained alert. The snow started to soften in some areas, and ice on rivers and lakes began to thin. Even though the sun appeared more often, the cold could still be severe, so the same careful routines continued. People watched the weather carefully, observing the clouds, wind, and temperature. Even small signs could indicate that a sudden storm or freeze was approaching. Food supplies were closely monitored during this time. Winter stores were still essential because fresh food was limited. People carefully rationed dried meat, preserved fish, and stored berries and roots. Hunting was still necessary, but animals were harder to find because some species had already moved or hidden during deep winter. Hunters observed where animals had emerged and moved slowly to avoid scaring them. Water management continued to be critical. As ice began to melt on rivers and lakes, people had more options for drinking water, but the water was often cold and sometimes dangerous due to floating ice or fast currents. Melting snow remained an important method to obtain clean drinking water. Wells or natural springs were if available. Clean water prevented illness, which could still be dangerous after months of winter scarcity. Shelters were inspected and repaired as needed. Winter storms might have damaged roofs, walls, or furs. Permanent shelters were reinforced with new wood, animal skins, and earth. Temporary shelters were also checked in case travel was necessary. Maintaining a safe and warm living space remained a top priority. Clothing continued to be layered for warmth. Even as temperatures rose slightly, mornings and evenings remained cold. Furs, gloves, hats, and boots were maintained carefully. Wet clothing was dried near fires, and worn layers were replaced or repaired. Keeping warm prevented frostbite and maintained health. Hunting during this transitional season required observation and patience. Animals were changing their habits, moving to new feeding areas or seeking water. Hunters watched for subtle signs, such as tracks in thawing snow or disturbed vegetation. Wind and weather continued to influence hunting strategies. People learned to predict animal behavior from experience, ensuring efficient use of energy and maximizing the chance of a successful hunt. Fishing became easier in some ways as ice melted, but it still required careful attention. Ice holes could remain dangerous, so people continued to cut them safely and monitor conditions. Rivers and lakes often moved faster due to melting snow, requiring extra caution. Fishing lines, spears, and nets were carefully checked and repaired as needed. Fresh fish was sometimes supplemented with preserved fish from winter stores. Travel during the late winter and early spring remained difficult. Snow could still be deep in some areas, while mud and thawed patches slowed movement in others. People planned routes carefully to avoid dangerous ice or terrain. Sleds and snowshoes were still used where snow remained, and dogs continued to help pull supplies. Careful preparation ensured safe travel for both short and long trips. Predators continued to be a concern during this time. Wolves and bears adjusted their behavior with the changing season. Wolves might hunt more frequently as animals moved, and bears emerging from hibernation could be more aggressive in search of food. People observed tracks and animal behavior closely. Dogs remained essential for alerts, and fires were maintained around camps for protection. Community cooperation remained critical. Everyone had tasks to perform, and coordination was necessary to ensure survival. Adults hunted, gathered, repaired shelters, and prepared food. Children assisted and continued to learn essential skills. Elders guided the community, sharing experience about changes in animal behavior, weather, and survival strategies. Cooperation and trust ensured the group could navigate the challenges of late winter and early spring safely. Daily routines adapted slightly as the season transitioned. Mornings still began with tending fires, checking food, and preparing for tasks. Hunting and gathering were conducted carefully, observing animal movement and environmental changes. Children helped and learned, performing small but necessary tasks. Elders continued to provide guidance and instruction. By mid-afternoon, people returned to camp to care for food, maintain clothing, and check shelters. The evening was spent resting, eating, and sharing stories. This rhythm helped maintain physical and mental health after months of harsh winter. Food preservation continued to be vital. Dried or smoked meat, preserved fish, and stored plants were carefully monitored. Any additional food obtained during hunting or gathering was stored for immediate use or future needs. Sharing food reinforced social cohesion, ensuring that everyone, especially children, elders, or injured people, had enough to survive. Observation of the environment became increasingly important as the snow melted and terrain changed. People watched for thin ice, flooding from melting snow, and changes in animal behavior. Rivers and streams swelled with meltwater, sometimes blocking paths or creating dangerous currents. Snowdrifts melted unevenly, forming weak patches or hidden obstacles. Awareness of these environmental changes prevented accidents and guided movement and planning. Children's education continued through observation, participation, and guided practice. They learned to track animals, monitor water sources, navigate terrain safely, and maintain fire. They practiced tool making, repaired clothing, and assisted with shelter maintenance. Through repeated practice and observation, children gradually acquired the skills needed to become independent members of the tribe. Clothing maintenance remained a daily task. Layers of fur, skins, and woven materials were inspected and repaired. Footwear was especially important as thawed snow could wet feet and lead to frostbite or illness. Gloves, hats, and coats were adjusted to changing temperatures. Keeping clothing in good condition was essential for safety and comfort. Fire remained central to daily life. It provided warmth, light, cooking, and protection from predators. People carefully managed firewood and monitored fires throughout the day. Embers from previous fires were preserved for quick ignition. Fire allowed the tribe to maintain routines safely and comfortably, even as temperatures fluctuated during the seasonal transition. Hunting strategies adapted to seasonal changes. Animals shifted feeding areas, traveled in different directions, or changed group patterns. Hunters adjusted approaches, observing footprints, broken branches, or feeding signs. Wind direction, temperature, and sunlight all influenced hunting. Patience, observation, and careful planning continued to be essential for successful hunting. Fishing required adaptation as ice melted and rivers and lakes became more dynamic. Holes in ice could collapse or freeze over unexpectedly. Currents became stronger, requiring careful attention. Fish movement patterns changed with temperature and water flow. Hunters adjusted their fishing techniques to maintain efficiency. Fish remained an essential protein and fat source. Travel continued to require planning and caution. Snow and mud could slow movement, while hidden ice or weak ground created hazards. Travelers carried sufficient food, water, clothing, and tools. Sleds pulled by dogs or reindeer transported heavy loads. Routes were carefully planned based on environmental observation, knowledge of predators, and recent experience. Predator avoidance continued to be a key concern. Wolves followed prey animals, and bears searched for food after hibernation. People tracked predator signs and used dogs, fires, and noise to maintain safety. Camps and temporary shelters were carefully placed to reduce risk. Awareness and preparation allowed the tribe to minimize danger while maintaining essential hunting and travel activities. Community cooperation was reinforced during this transitional period. Adults hunted, gathered, repaired shelters, and prepared food. Children assisted and learned. Elders provided guidance on survival strategies, environmental observation, and safety. Coordination, trust, and shared effort ensured the group could thrive despite environmental challenges. Daily routines continued to be structured and deliberate. Morning activities included fire management, food preparation, water collection, and shelter maintenance. Midday focused on hunting, gathering, and tool repair. Afternoon involved returning to camp, maintaining food stores, and preparing for evening. Nighttime included rest, social activities, and observation. Consistent routines maintained physical health, safety, and mental focus. Food management remained a priority. Stored supplies were monitored carefully, and additional food obtained through hunting, fishing, or gathering was properly preserved. Sharing food strengthened social cohesion and ensured survival for vulnerable members. Efficient management prevented waste and ensured that essential nutrition was available throughout the transition from winter to spring. Observation of nature was continuous. Snow, ice, wind, clouds, and animal behavior provided critical information. Changes in animal movement indicated where prey or predators were located. Weather changes could signal storms, temperature shifts, or other hazards. Reading these signs allowed people to plan movement, hunting, and shelter activities safely. Children's education continued through practical participation. They observed adults, practiced skills, and received guidance. Tracking animals, monitoring water, navigating terrain, and maintaining tools and clothing were essential skills. Through repetition and observation, children became capable of independent survival. Clothing and equipment maintenance remained vital. Furs, skins, and boots were repaired and cleaned. Gloves, hats, and coats were adjusted for temperature changes. Tools were sharpened, repaired, or replaced as necessary. Proper maintenance prevented illness, injury, and loss of mobility. Fire was managed throughout the day. Firewood was collected and preserved. Fires provided warmth, cooking capability, and predator deterrence. Embers were maintained to restart fires quickly if needed. Fire management was an ongoing task that ensured safety and comfort in fluctuating seasonal conditions. Hunting, fishing, and gathering continued to require observation and patience. Animals moved differently as seasons changed. Hunters adjusted techniques based on experience, wind direction, and animal behavior. Fishing required adapting to changing ice conditions and river flow. Traps were placed strategically and checked frequently. Efficiency and skill were critical to maintain food supplies. Water management remained important. Rivers, lakes, and snow provided drinking water. Melting snow was a reliable source, while flowing water sometimes required filtering or boiling. Safe water was essential for health, and access influenced shelter placement, travel, and daily routines. Travel was conducted with careful planning and caution. Snow, mud, ice, and terrain hazards required careful route selection. Sleds and snowshoes were used when appropriate. Dogs and reindeer assisted in transporting supplies. Travel required energy management, awareness of predators, and continuous observation of environmental conditions. Predator avoidance was constant. Wolves, bears, and lynx adjusted behavior with seasonal changes. Tracking footprints and observing animal behavior allowed people to anticipate encounters. Dogs, fires, and noise helped protect camps. Shelters were strategically located to minimize risk. Awareness, preparation, and cautious movement ensured survival. Community cooperation remained central. Adults performed essential tasks, children assisted and learned, and elders guided decision-making. Sharing knowledge, food, and protection maintained cohesion and safety. Coordination ensured the tribe could survive and thrive despite environmental challenges. Daily routines structured life. Fire, food, water, shelter, hunting, gathering, and tool maintenance were performed systematically. Routines ensured safety, preserved energy, and strengthened skills. Children learned by observing and participating, gradually acquiring full survival competence. As spring progressed, the snow slowly retreated from the forests and plains. The days became longer and sunlight began to warm the land. Even so, Siberian spring was unpredictable. Snow could return unexpectedly, and rivers could overflow from melting ice. People continued to observe the environment carefully, noting temperature changes, water levels, and the behavior of animals. Every small observation informed decisions about hunting, travel, and shelter. Food management remained crucial. While fresh plants and berries started to appear, winter stores were still essential. Preserved meat, dried fish, and stored roots continued to be carefully monitored. Families rationed these supplies, ensuring that no one went hungry while the first signs of new food became available. Hunting, fishing, and gathering were carefully balanced with stored food, making sure the tribe did not exhaust its resources too early. Hunting shifted with the season. Animals began to move more freely as the snow melted. Some predators returned to active hunting, and prey animals changed their feeding patterns. Hunters adapted to these shifts by moving along riverbanks, forests, and open plains, observing signs like broken branches, tracks, and fresh droppings. They paid attention to the wind and terrain, remaining quiet and patient to approach prey effectively. Fishing also adapted to changing conditions. Rivers, streams, and lakes were less frozen, but currents were stronger from melting ice. Ice holes were no longer needed, but careful attention to riverbanks, currents, and fish movement became essential. Fishing lines, spears, and nets were prepared and checked for damage from winter, ensuring efficiency. Fish continued to provide essential protein and fat for the community. Water management improved with the thaw. Fresh, flowing water became more accessible, but it was still monitored for safety. Ice chunks, cold currents, or contamination could pose risks. People sometimes boiled water or filtered it using cloth to ensure cleanliness. Water availability influenced where temporary or permanent camps were set up, especially during long travel or hunting trips. Shelter maintenance continued as the snow melted. Winter shelters were inspected for damage, leaks, or weakened structures. Repairs were made using wood, earth, and animal skins. Temporary shelters were built during travel or hunting expeditions. These shelters were carefully reinforced to remain safe from wind, rain, or early spring storms. Properly maintained shelters ensured warmth, protection, and rest, which were all essential for long-term survival. Clothing adapted to the changing season, while thick furs and multiple layers were still necessary during cold mornings and nights. Lighter layers were introduced for the warmer daytime hours. Clothing was repaired or replaced if damaged during winter. Wet clothes were dried thoroughly near fires. Proper clothing prevented illness and maintained comfort while allowing freedom of movement for hunting and gathering. Fire continued to be a central element in daily life. Fires provided warmth in chilly mornings and evenings, allowed food to be cooked or preserved, and helped maintain community focus. Fires also kept predators away and provided a place for people to gather, rest, and share knowledge. People carefully managed firewood reserves to ensure a continuous supply. Embers from previous fires were preserved for quick ignition, especially during travel or unexpected storms. Observation of nature remained constant. Animals' behavior, plant growth, river levels, and weather patterns were all closely watched. Hunters learned where prey moved, when predators were active, and how conditions would change throughout the day. Children were taught to notice subtle signs in the environment, like birds gathering or a sudden change in wind, which could indicate the arrival of predators or weather shifts. Children's learning continued through practical participation. They assisted with fire, collected water, helped maintain shelters, repaired tools, and learned to navigate terrain safely. They gradually learned to track animals, fish, and identify edible plants. These skills were reinforced daily through observation, repetition, and guided practice, preparing them for independent survival as adults. Daily routines remained structured. Mornings began with fire management, checking food and water, and preparing for daily tasks. Hunting, gathering, fishing, and tool maintenance occurred throughout the day. Midday was used for rest and planning, while the afternoon focused on completing essential tasks and monitoring environmental conditions. Evenings were for maintaining shelters, clothing, and fires, as well as social interaction and storytelling. This rhythm maintained energy, health, and community cohesion. Community cooperation was essential during this seasonal transition. Adults performed essential tasks, children assisted and learned, and elders provided guidance. Knowledge about animals, weather, and environmental changes was shared. Cooperation ensured that survival strategies were executed efficiently. Trust and mutual support strengthened social bonds, which were crucial in unpredictable conditions. Predator management remained critical. Wolves, bears, and other carnivores resumed activity as spring arrived. People continued to monitor tracks and signs. Dogs were trained to alert the community to danger, while fires and noise discouraged predators. Camps and temporary shelters were strategically placed near natural barriers or elevated terrain to improve safety. Avoiding confrontation was always preferred, but preparation for defense was necessary. Food preservation remained a daily task. Fresh food obtained from hunting, fishing, or gathering was preserved using drying, smoking, or cold storage. Stored winter food continued to be rationed carefully to ensure availability until new food sources could fully support the community. Sharing food remained essential for community stability, especially for elders, children, and those who were ill or injured. Hunting strategies evolved with spring conditions. Prey animals were moving toward new feeding grounds or water sources. Hunters followed tracks, observed animal behavior, and adjusted approaches. Wind, terrain, and weather continued to influence strategies. Patience, timing, and observation were more important than speed or strength. Success required careful planning and understanding of the natural world. Fishing strategies also adapted. Melting ice and increased water flow required careful monitoring of riverbanks, currents, and fish movement. Tools used for fishing were maintained or repaired as necessary. Fishing remained a primary source of nutrition, especially as new plant foods became available only gradually. Fish was often preserved immediately to ensure long-term survival. Water management continued to be essential. Freshwater sources were more plentiful, but careful attention to safety remained necessary. Ice chunks, cold currents, or muddy water could cause problems. Water was collected, stored, and sometimes filtered or boiled. Access to reliable water influenced where people set up temporary shelters or hunting camps. Travel became easier in some ways as snow melted and ice thinned, but caution was still needed. Mud, rivers, and uneven terrain slowed movement. Snow patches could remain deep and unpredictable. Sleds pulled by dogs or reindeer continued to be used for transporting heavy loads. Routes were carefully planned to avoid hazards and minimize energy expenditure. Elders often guided travelers, drawing on experience and environmental knowledge. Observation of animals was critical during this period. Prey animals moved to new areas while predators adjusted their hunting behavior. Tracking and understanding animal habits were essential for both hunting and safety. People also observed smaller signs, like birds or insect activity, which indicated environmental changes or nearby danger. Awareness of the natural world informed all decisions and ensured long-term survival. Children's education advanced during this period. They participated in hunting, fishing, gathering, and daily survival tasks under supervision. They learned to read tracks, monitor weather, maintain fire, repair clothing, and navigate terrain. By repeatedly practicing these skills, children gradually became capable of contributing fully to community survival. Community cooperation remained vital. Tasks were divided among members according to ability, age, and experience. Adults provided the main labor for hunting, building, and repair. Children assisted and learned essential skills. Elders guided decisions and shared knowledge about environmental changes, predator behavior, and resource management. Cooperation and trust allowed the community to navigate the unpredictable spring safely. Daily routines adapted slightly as the season changed. Morning activities focused on fire, food, and water management. Midday was spent on hunting, gathering, or travel. Afternoon included maintenance of tools, clothing, and shelters. Evening involved tending fire, preparing food, and sharing knowledge. Routines provided structure, preserved energy, and reinforced skills. Clothing maintenance continued to be important. Layers were adjusted for fluctuating temperatures. Furs, boots, gloves, and hats were repaired as needed. Wet clothing was dried near fires. Proper clothing prevented illness and maintained comfort during unpredictable spring weather. Fire remained central to survival. Morning and evening fires provided warmth, cooking ability, and community gathering points. Fires also deterred predators and provided a means to dry clothing or preserve food. Fire management was continuous, requiring careful attention to wood, wind, and ember preservation. Hunting, fishing, and gathering strategies required continuous adaptation. Animals moved differently as snow melted, vegetation changed, and weather patterns shifted. Hunters adjusted techniques based on these observations. Fishing required monitoring rivers, streams, and lakes for currents and fish activity. Gathering included identifying edible plants and understanding seasonal growth patterns. Efficiency, observation, and patience remained crucial. As spring gradually gave way to summer, the days became noticeably longer, and the sun rose earlier and set later. Siberian summer was brief but critical for survival. The land thawed, rivers flowed freely, and the first green shoots of plants appeared. For the tribes, summer was a time of renewal, preparation, and careful observation. The work of these months directly influenced their chances of surviving the next winter. Food gathering shifted with the season. Berries ripened on bushes, wild roots became more accessible, and edible greens flourished in forested areas. Gathering required careful selection, as some plants were poisonous, while others were beneficial. People learned which plants were safe to eat and how to preserve them. Children assisted in gathering under the guidance of adults, learning through observation and repetition. Hunting continued but changed focus. With snow melted, prey animals moved differently. Large herbivores such as elk, deer, and reindeer were easier to track in open terrain, but they also moved faster and more widely. Hunters adapted by observing patterns, listening for rustling in the forest, and using natural cover. Wind direction and camouflage remained critical, as animals could detect humans from a great distance. Fishing was abundant in summer. Rivers, lakes, and streams teemed with fish, providing an essential source of protein. People fished with spears, nets, or simple lines, adapting to the conditions of flowing water. Fishing became easier than in winter, but attention to safety remained important. Swift currents, slippery riverbanks, and deep pools required care. Children helped by collecting bait or watching nets under adult supervision, gradually learning fishing techniques themselves. Preservation of food became the primary concern during summer. Meat, fish, and plant foods were prepared for storage to last through the harsh winter months. Drying meat and fish in the sun or over controlled smoke fires ensured long-term preservation. Berries and roots were dried or stored in cool, shaded areas. People learned to combine fresh and preserved food to maintain nutrition throughout the year. Water management shifted slightly in summer. Flowing rivers and streams were abundant, but care was still required. Ice was no longer a concern, but people ensured water was safe to drink. Filtering through cloth or boiling when possible prevented illness. Knowledge of clean water sources guided the placement of temporary camps and hunting grounds. Shelters were adapted for warmer temperatures. Winter insulation was removed or reduced. Ventilation became important to prevent overheating and maintain comfort. Temporary shelters were built during hunting or gathering trips, often near rivers or meadows. Permanent shelters were maintained, cleaned, and repaired. Even during summer, preparation for sudden storms remained critical, as summer weather could be unpredictable. Clothing adjusted to the warmer weather. Layers were reduced, but protection from insects and sun remained important. Lightweight furs or skins were used for outdoor work, and hats or head coverings prevented sun exposure. Footwear continued to protect against rough terrain, sharp rocks, and insect bites. Maintaining clothing in good condition was essential for health and comfort during summer tasks. Fire management shifted as well. Fires were smaller and more controlled, mainly used for cooking, preserving food, or warmth during cooler nights. Smoke from fires also helped deter insects and small predators. Maintaining fires safely remained important, especially when building temporary shelters or cooking food in forested areas. Observation of the environment was ongoing. People watched animal behavior, plant growth, river levels, and weather changes. Even subtle signs, like the movement of birds or sudden changes in wind, indicated opportunities or potential danger. Knowledge of nature guided hunting, gathering, travel, and preparation for seasonal transitions. Children were taught to observe and interpret these signs, gradually building their survival knowledge. Predator awareness continued in summer. Wolves and bears remained active. Wolves often hunted in packs and followed prey, while bears searched for food to regain strength after winter. People monitored animal tracks, listened for warning sounds, and maintained dogs for alerts. Camps and shelters were strategically placed to reduce risk. Fires and noise were used as deterrents. Avoiding confrontation remained the preferred method, with defense measures in place as a last resort. Community cooperation was vital during summer. Adults performed the main labor of hunting, gathering, repairing shelters, and preparing for winter. Children assisted and learned essential skills. Elders provided guidance, teaching knowledge about the environment, animal behavior, and seasonal changes. Sharing resources and responsibilities reinforced trust and strengthened the community. Summer required coordination and careful planning for future survival. Daily routines continued to structure life. Mornings began with checking food and water, tending fires, and preparing for tasks. Hunting, gathering, and fishing occurred throughout the day. Midday included rest and social activities, such as storytelling or teaching skills. Afternoons focused on preserving food, repairing shelters, and preparing tools. Evenings involved shared meals, maintaining fire, and planning the next day. These routines maintained efficiency, health, and community cohesion. Food preservation intensified during summer. Large amounts of meat, fish, berries, and roots were stored for winter. Preservation methods included drying, smoking, and cold storage where possible. Maintaining a supply of food ensured survival through the next harsh months. Sharing preserved food reinforced social cohesion and provided security for the entire tribe. Hunting strategies evolved as summer progressed. Animals moved toward grazing areas, water sources, or shaded forest locations. Hunters observed tracks, listened for sounds, and studied feeding patterns. Patience and strategy were essential, as animals could detect humans from great distances. Hunting provided both immediate sustenance and resources for winter storage, such as hides for clothing or tools. Fishing remained a consistent source of food. People monitored rivers and streams for ideal fishing spots. They adjusted techniques for flowing water, using nets, spears, or simple lines. Fresh fish supplemented preserved fish, providing essential nutrition. Children assisted in non-hazardous ways, learning skills gradually. Water sources were abundant but still required attention. Swift rivers, shallow streams, or spring-fed pools provided drinking and cooking water. Safety was critical. People avoided risky crossings, strong currents, or stagnant water. Knowledge of water sources influenced camp placement and travel routes. Travel during summer focused on resource gathering, hunting expeditions, and preparation for the next winter. Snow was no longer a concern, but rivers, wetlands, and uneven terrain created challenges. Sleds and dogs were still used where needed, while lightweight carriers or packs were preferred for easier mobility. Long-distance travel required careful planning, taking into account energy, weather, and safety. Observation of predators remained important. Wolves, bears, and smaller carnivores continued to be active, though they were less of a threat than in winter. Tracking footprints and signs, using dogs, and strategic placement of camps and shelters ensured safety. People maintained vigilance while balancing the increased availability of food and resources. Children continued learning essential skills. They participated in hunting preparation, fishing, gathering, and food preservation. They observed adults navigating terrain, reading animal behavior, and maintaining tools and shelters. Repetition and practice gradually made children capable of independent survival tasks. Community cooperation was reinforced by the demands of summer. Tasks were divided efficiently. Adults focused on labor-intensive activities like hunting, fishing, building, and repairing shelters. Children assisted and learned skills for the future. Elders guided decisions, using accumulated knowledge to optimize survival strategies. Sharing resources, teaching skills, and monitoring safety strengthened the community as a whole. Daily routines in summer adapted to weather and tasks. Mornings focused on preparing for hunting, gathering, or fishing. Midday allowed rest, teaching, and observation of environmental changes. Afternoons included food preservation, shelter maintenance, and tool repair. Evening activities involved cooking, fire management, and community interaction. The structured day supported physical health, skill development, and social cohesion. Clothing maintenance remained necessary. Lighter layers were worn, but protection from sun, insects, and rough terrain was essential. Furs and skins were repaired, washed, and prepared for storage. Footwear was inspected and repaired to prevent injury. Proper clothing ensured comfort, safety, and readiness for seasonal changes. Fire management adapted to warmer temperatures. Fires were smaller, focused on cooking and preservation. Smoke also deterred insects and small predators. Maintaining a controlled fire remained essential for safety and efficiency. Embers were preserved for future use during travel or unexpected weather events. Observation of nature remained continuous. People monitored plant growth, animal behavior, water levels, and weather. Subtle changes guided decisions on hunting, fishing, gathering, and travel. Knowledge of environmental patterns allowed the community to anticipate risks and opportunities. Children learned to interpret these signs as part of their gradual education. Late summer in Siberia brought longer, warmer days, but the people remained vigilant. Although snow was far away, signs of the coming winter were already visible in the changing length of days and subtle shifts in temperature. Siberian tribes had learned to read these signs carefully. Observing the environment allowed them to prepare gradually for the difficult months ahead. Food gathering reached its peak during late summer. Berries, roots, and edible greens were plentiful, but some of the most important tasks involved preserving these foods for winter. Families worked together to dry, smoke, or store fruits, vegetables, and meat. Children participated by collecting smaller items like berries, learning which plants were edible and which were unsafe. These months were a critical window to ensure food security for the upcoming months of scarcity. Hunting shifted toward long-term preparation. Hunters not only sought immediate food, but also materials for winter survival. Hides were carefully removed from large animals and prepared for clothing, bedding, and shelter repair. Bones and sinew were collected to make tools, ropes, or fishing lines. Even small animals trapped for food provided fur and other useful materials. Every part of the animal was used efficiently. Fishing continued to be a primary food source. Rivers, streams, and lakes were full of fish after the spring melt and summer growth. People fished in shallow areas, near river bends, and at deep pools where fish were abundant. Nets, lines, and spears were checked, repaired, or replaced as needed. Fish was often smoked or dried to store for winter months. Children assisted in tasks such as baiting lines, gathering small fish, or carrying preserved food. Water management became easier as rivers and streams flowed freely, but careful observation remained essential. Swift currents could be dangerous, and stagnant pools could become contaminated. People were attentive to the safety of water sources, particularly during longer trips or while hunting in more remote areas. Boiling or filtering water continued to be used when possible. Shelter preparation for the coming winter began in late summer. Permanent dwellings were repaired, reinforced, and insulated. New shelters were sometimes constructed for winter use, especially in areas where the tribe planned to spend the coldest months. Temporary shelters for hunting and gathering trips were maintained and reinforced to withstand storms or predators. Proper shelter was critical for survival during the harsh months ahead. Clothing maintenance and preparation became a key daily task. Furs, skins, and boots were inspected and repaired. Summer layers were gradually replaced with warmer clothing in preparation for winter. Gloves, hats, and insulated footwear were repaired or created from animal hides. Clothing was not only functional, but also essential for preventing frostbite, hypothermia, and other cold-related dangers. Fire management remained central to daily life. Fires were used to cook and preserve food, dry clothing, and provide warmth on cooler nights. Smoke from controlled fires helped deter insects and small predators. Firewood reserves were carefully gathered and stored to ensure an adequate supply for the coming months. Maintaining fire and embers for quick ignition was a constant task, particularly during hunting or travel. Observation of the environment continued as an essential survival skill. People tracked the behavior of animals, noting their movement patterns, feeding areas, and signs of predators. Birds and smaller animals indicated changes in weather or predator presence. Understanding these subtle cues guided hunting, gathering, and planning for winter. Children were gradually trained to recognize these patterns, forming the foundation of their survival knowledge. Predator awareness remained vital. Wolves, bears, and smaller predators were still active, though the abundance of food in summer sometimes reduced direct encounters. Tracking animal movements, observing tracks, and maintaining dogs as alerts allowed the tribe to minimize risk. Camps were strategically located, and fires or noise were used to deter predators. Avoiding confrontation was always preferred, but preparation for defense remained a constant consideration. Community cooperation was reinforced in late summer. Adults managed the major tasks of hunting, gathering, food preservation, and shelter construction. Children assisted and learned practical skills. Elders provided guidance on survival strategies, environmental changes, and resource management. Shared effort ensured that the tribe could maximize efficiency and maintain safety. Trust and mutual reliance strengthened social cohesion, which was essential for surviving harsh winters. Daily routines continue to structure life efficiently. Mornings began with checking food stores, water sources, and fire readiness. Hunting, gathering, or fishing occurred throughout the day, with attention to efficiency and safety. Midday included rest, food preparation, and teaching younger members essential skills. Afternoons were spent repairing shelters, maintaining tools, and preserving food. Evening activities included tending fires, sharing meals, and planning for the following day. This rhythm maintained physical health, ensured skill development, and reinforced community bonds. Food preservation intensified in preparation for winter. Meat, fish, berries, and roots were carefully dried, smoked, or stored. Stored winter food was monitored to ensure it remained edible. Freshly hunted or gathered food supplemented preserved stores, maintaining nutrition and energy for daily tasks. Sharing food reinforced trust, security, and social cohesion within the community. Hunting strategies adapted for preparation. Prey animals began to move toward autumn feeding areas, and predators adjusted their hunting patterns as well. Hunters observed tracks, feeding signs, and terrain to plan the most efficient hunts. Patience, timing, and careful observation ensured that both immediate food needs and long-term survival resources, such as hides and bones, were obtained. Fishing also required adaptation. Rivers and streams had higher water levels due to melting snow and summer rains. Hunters monitored water flow, fish behavior, and seasonal patterns to maximize catches. Fish was preserved immediately when possible. Children assisted in safe, manageable tasks such as baiting lines or carrying smaller catches. Water management remained critical, particularly during travel or hunting trips. Safe drinking water was carefully selected from flowing streams, pools, or spring-fed sources. Contaminated or stagnant water was avoided. Knowledge of reliable water sources influenced the placement of temporary camps and the planning of longer excursions. Travel was carefully planned. Late summer and early autumn were times for gathering resources from distant areas, scouting hunting grounds, or moving to winter camps. Rivers, marshes, and uneven terrain required careful navigation. Sleds, snowshoes, and dog teams were maintained for future winter use, even if they were not needed immediately. Energy conservation and safety remained central concerns. Observation of predators continued. Wolves and bears remained active as they prepared for their own survival in the coming winter. Tracking footprints, understanding hunting patterns, and using dogs or fires as deterrents allowed humans to avoid dangerous encounters. Camps and shelters were strategically positioned to reduce risk. Safety remained a constant priority, even in abundant summer months. Children continued learning through practice and observation. They participated in hunting, gathering, food preservation, and shelter maintenance under supervision. They learned to read animal tracks, understand seasonal patterns, monitor weather, and navigate terrain safely. Repetition and guidance gradually made them capable of independent contribution to the tribe's survival. Community cooperation intensified as preparations for autumn and winter began. Adults focused on food storage, shelter construction, and tool repair. Children assisted while continuing to learn essential skills. Elders advised on resource allocation, survival strategies, and environmental changes. Cooperation ensured that all essential tasks were completed efficiently and that the community could face the upcoming cold season with confidence. Daily routines in late summer were adapted to the demands of preparation. Mornings focused on checking fire, food, and water, and preparing for the day's activities. Midday allowed rest and skill teaching. Afternoons were spent gathering resources, repairing tools, and maintaining shelters. Evening included cooking, fire management, and communal interaction. These routines reinforced skill, efficiency, and social cohesion. Clothing preparation intensified. Furs, skins, and boots were inspected, repaired, or replaced. Warmer clothing for winter was prepared and stored. Proper clothing ensured protection from cold, precipitation, and frostbite during the months ahead. Footwear, gloves, hats, and insulated garments were all carefully maintained. Fire management remained central. Fires were used for cooking, preservation, and drying clothing. Smoke deterred insects and small predators. Firewood reserves were carefully maintained. Embers were preserved for quick ignition during unexpected events or travel. Fire ensured safety, warmth, and the ability to maintain daily routines efficiently. Observation of the environment remained continuous. People monitored the behavior of animals, the growth of plants, river levels, and weather patterns. Subtle changes indicated upcoming challenges or opportunities. Understanding these signs guided decisions about hunting, gathering, travel, and winter preparation. Children were trained to interpret these signs, building their knowledge and awareness gradually. Predator awareness continued. Wolves, bears, and smaller carnivores were tracked, monitored, and deterred. Dogs remained essential for alerting the community. Fires, noise, and strategic placement of shelters minimized encounters. Avoiding confrontation remained a priority, while preparedness ensured that any potential threat could be managed effectively. As summer waned, the first hints of autumn appeared across the Siberian landscape. Days grew shorter, mornings were cooler, and a Christmas began to enter the air. Even before the first frost, the tribes understood that the coming months would demand careful preparation. Each family, each individual, knew that survival depended on careful attention to food, shelter, clothing, and observation of the environment. Food preservation reached its most critical phase. Meat and fish obtained throughout summer were carefully dried, smoked, or stored in cold, shaded areas to prevent spoilage. Berries, roots, and wild vegetables were gathered in their ripest state and prepared for long-term storage. Every edible plant, every part of an animal, was utilized efficiently. Children assisted by sorting, carrying, or helping arrange food for drying or storage, learning essential skills in the process. Hunting took on a dual purpose. Immediate nutrition was essential, but hunters also focused on preparing materials for winter. Large animals were tracked for their meat, hides, and bones. Small animals continued to be trapped for food and clothing materials. Hunters adjusted their strategies as prey moved toward winter feeding grounds or shelters, tracking them carefully through forests, meadows, and along riverbanks. Stealth, patience, and careful observation remained central to successful hunting. Fishing shifted slightly as rivers cooled. Fish became less active, moving deeper into slower currents. Hunters adapted by choosing fishing spots carefully, using nets and lines effectively, and timing their activity according to fish behavior. Fish remained an essential source of protein and fat, and preservation techniques such as smoking or drying ensured it could sustain the community through the long winter months. Water management remained a daily concern. Rivers and streams provided abundant water, but flowing currents, slippery banks, and shallow pools required care. Stagnant or contaminated water was avoided. Knowledge of reliable water sources guided the location of temporary camps, hunting expeditions, and preparation for winter settlements. Children were taught to recognize safe water sources and handle them carefully, reinforcing essential survival skills. Shelter maintenance became increasingly important as temperatures dropped. Winter dwellings were inspected, repaired, and reinforced with wood, earth, or animal hides. Temporary shelters used for hunting or gathering trips were strengthened to withstand early frost, wind, and potential snow. Properly maintained shelters were essential not only for warmth, but also for safety from predators and protection from storms. Clothing preparation intensified. Furs, skins, and insulated garments were checked and repaired. Warm layers for night and day were carefully stored and maintained. Footwear, gloves, and hats were inspected for durability, ensuring protection against cold, wind, and early frost. Even small details like lining boots or adjusting hats for comfort could make a significant difference in preventing frostbite and maintaining energy. Fire management continued to be a central aspect of daily life. Fires were used for warmth, cooking, drying clothing, and preparing food for storage. Embers were preserved to allow quick ignition during travel or unexpected weather changes. Fire also acted as a deterrent for predators and a point of gathering for community members, providing both practical and social benefits. Observation of the environment became more precise in autumn. People watched the movement of animals, the ripening and decay of plants, and the behavior of birds and smaller creatures. Each change signaled an opportunity or potential danger. Wolves and bears were monitored as they prepared for their own winter needs. Understanding these subtle cues guided hunting, food preservation, and the placement of temporary and permanent shelters. Children were trained to interpret these signs gradually, building knowledge that would be critical in later years. Predator awareness increased with the changing season. Wolves began to hunt more actively, moving in packs and covering large areas. Bears emerged from hibernation in late summer and early autumn, seeking food to build fat reserves. People used dogs as alerts, maintained fires around shelters, and chose elevated or sheltered locations for safety. Avoiding confrontation remained the priority, but readiness for defense was essential, particularly when traveling or hunting in remote areas. Community cooperation was central to survival. Adults carried out labor, intensive tasks such as hunting, fishing, preserving food, maintaining shelters, and preparing clothing for winter. Children assisted where safe, learning essential skills while contributing to the group's efficiency. Elders provided guidance, drawing on decades of experience to predict weather patterns, animal movements, and seasonal changes. Cooperation, trust, and shared responsibility allowed the tribe to prepare effectively for winter. Daily routines adapted to the increased demands of autumn preparation. Mornings focused on fire, food, and water, followed by immediate tasks like hunting, gathering, or fishing. Midday provided rest, food preparation, and instruction for younger members. Afternoons were spent maintaining tools, repairing clothing, and strengthening shelters. Evenings included communal meals, tending fires, and planning for the following day. This structure ensured that tasks were completed efficiently, skills were reinforced, and energy was conserved. Food preservation reached its peak. Meat was smoked or dried carefully, fish was prepared for long-term storage, and berries and roots were stored in cold, shaded locations. Winter stores were monitored daily to prevent spoilage or theft by wildlife. Sharing preserved food maintained community trust and ensured that all members, especially children, elders, or injured individuals, had enough to survive. Hunting strategies evolved as animals moved toward winter feeding grounds or shelters. Hunters studied tracks, feeding signs, and terrain to optimize success. Patience, stealth, and understanding of animal behavior remained essential. Hunting not only provided immediate food, but also ensured that hides, bones, and sinew were available for clothing, tools, and shelter repair. Every resource was used efficiently to maximize survival potential. Fishing required adaptation to changing water temperatures and river conditions. Fish moved to deeper or slower sections of rivers. Hunters adjusted placement of nets and lines, observed feeding patterns, and timed their activity carefully. Fish was often preserved immediately to maintain nutritional value and storage longevity. Children assisted safely with simpler tasks, learning techniques through observation and supervised practice. Water management continued to influence daily routines. Reliable sources were mapped and monitored. Flowing rivers and streams were preferred, while stagnant pools were avoided. Children learned to identify safe water, collect it efficiently, and transport it to shelters or camps. Access to water was essential for cooking, drinking, and preserving food. Travel became strategic as early autumn weather cooled. Hunting expeditions, gathering trips, and preparation for winter shelters required careful route planning. Rivers, wetlands, and uneven terrain presented challenges. Sleds, snowshoes, and dog teams were prepared for future use in winter. Travel efficiency, energy conservation, and safety were constant concerns. Observation of predators remained critical. Wolves, bears, and smaller carnivores were monitored for signs of movement or predation. Dogs provided alerts, while fire and noise served as deterrents. Shelter placement was chosen carefully to reduce the likelihood of dangerous encounters. Understanding predator behavior allowed humans to navigate the landscape safely while obtaining necessary resources. Children's education continued through hands-on participation. They assisted in hunting preparation, food preservation, shelter maintenance, and fire management. They were taught to read animal tracks, monitor weather, and navigate terrain safely. Gradual, repeated practice ensured that children developed confidence and competence in survival skills. Community cooperation intensified as the first frosts approached. Adults focused on preparing winter food stores, maintaining shelters, repairing tools and clothing, and planning travel routes. Children contributed safely while continuing to learn essential skills. Elders advised on seasonal changes, predator patterns, and resource allocation. Coordination, shared effort, and trust were critical for ensuring the group's readiness for the coming winter. Daily routines adjusted further as temperatures dropped. Morning tasks included checking fires, food, water, and shelter readiness. Midday was used for hunting, fishing, gathering, or teaching. Afternoons focused on food preservation, clothing repair, and shelter preparation. Evenings involved communal meals, tending fires, and discussion of plans for travel or hunting the next day. Structured routines ensured survival efficiency and reinforced social bonds. Clothing preparation became a primary focus. Furs, skins, boots, gloves, and hats were repaired, reinforced, or prepared for winter. Layers were tested for warmth and functionality. Children learned to dress appropriately for the cold, understanding how to layer clothing for maximum protection and mobility. Proper clothing prevented frostbite, maintained energy, and increased overall safety. Fire management remained central. Fires provided warmth during cooler mornings and nights, allowed food to be preserved, and deterred predators. Embers were preserved to facilitate quick ignition during early winter travel. Fire was not only practical, but also provided a place for community members to gather, plan, and share knowledge. Observation of the environment intensified as the first snow approached. People tracked animal movements, weather patterns, and plant changes. Birds migrating, the behavior of small mammals, and subtle temperature shifts indicated approaching winter conditions. Understanding these cues allowed the tribe to plan hunts, gather remaining resources, and finalize winter shelters. Children were trained to notice these signs, building critical observational skills for future survival. Predator awareness increased as wolves, bears, and other carnivores prepared for the scarcity of winter. Tracking signs, understanding predator behavior, and maintaining deterrents such as dogs and fire remained essential. Camps and shelters were strategically located to minimize risk. The tribe balanced vigilance with efficient hunting and preparation, ensuring both safety and productivity. As the first snowflakes fell, a hush seemed to settle over the land. The forest and plains were blanketed in white, and the rivers froze slowly, signaling that winter had arrived. For the Siberian tribes, this was the most challenging season of all. Survival depended on careful preparation, constant attention, and the knowledge passed down through generations. Daily routines shifted immediately with the cold. Mornings began early, with families tending fires to melt ice and warm the shelter. Adults checked food stores, ensuring that preserved meat, dried fish, and stored roots were safe from spoilage or animals. Children assisted, learning how to move quietly on snow, maintain small fires, and recognize subtle signs of danger in the environment. Every task, no matter how small, contributed to the safety and survival of the group. Hunting continued, but it became more challenging. Snow-covered tracks, prey animals moved less predictably, and temperatures made physical activity exhausting. Hunters relied on careful observation, patience, and understanding of animal behavior. They tracked footprints in fresh snow, watched for movement near frozen rivers or streams, and listened for subtle sounds of wildlife. Success in hunting during winter was not guaranteed. So energy had to be conserved for both the hunt and daily survival. Fishing in winter required skill and caution. Many lakes and rivers were covered with thick ice, so holes had to be cut carefully to avoid accidents. Hunters monitored ice thickness constantly, knowing that a misstep could be fatal. Fish were caught through ice fishing techniques using simple lines, nets, or spears. The cold preserved the catch naturally, but food still had to be stored carefully to prevent spoilage or freezing that made it unusable. Water management became a daily survival task. Melted ice and snow provided drinking water, but constant attention was needed. Water had to be collected carefully, often near rivers or streams, and heated to prevent freezing before use. Children were trained to recognize safe sources, avoiding ice that was too thin or pools contaminated by animals. Water was essential not just for drinking, but for cooking and preserving food. Shelters were of utmost importance during winter. Permanent dwellings were insulated with layers of earth, wood, and animal skins. Fires were maintained constantly, providing warmth, a place to cook, and a defense against predators. Temporary shelters for hunting trips were carefully built to withstand snow, wind, and freezing temperatures. Maintaining warmth in winter was not only about comfort, it was a matter of life and death. Clothing was crucial for survival. Thick furs and layers of insulated skins protected against frostbite and hypothermia. Gloves, hats, and boots were checked daily and repaired if needed. Even small tears could let in cold, so attention to detail was essential. Layering allowed movement while preserving warmth, and people knew how to adjust clothing for activity levels to avoid sweating and subsequent freezing. Fire management was central to daily life in winter. Fires were maintained continuously, using preserved embers for quick ignition if necessary. Wood was carefully rationed, with reserves stored in dry locations to last through heavy snowfall. Fire provided warmth, light, cooking capability, and protection from predators. Nighttime vigilance often centered on maintaining fire, ensuring that everyone stayed warm and safe throughout the long Siberian nights. Observation of the environment took on heightened importance. People watched for signs of approaching blizzards, shifts in animal behavior, or the presence of predators. Clouds, wind direction, and sudden temperature drops signaled dangerous weather, while tracks in snow revealed where prey and predators had traveled. Children were trained to notice these subtle signs early, learning how to respond appropriately to ensure safety. Predator management became a daily focus. Wolves and bears were more dangerous in winter, as hunger drove them closer to human settlements. Wolves hunted in packs, capable of attacking small groups or individuals. Bears, though less mobile in deep snow, were dangerous when scavenging or emerging from hibernation spots. People relied on dogs to alert them to predators, fires to deter them, and careful positioning of shelters to reduce risk. Traveling alone was avoided. Groups moved together for safety. Community cooperation became even more critical in winter. Every member had a role to play, from maintaining fire and food supplies to watching for predators. Adults hunted and preserved food, repaired shelters, and managed clothing. Children assisted safely while continuing to learn essential survival skills. Elders shared knowledge, guiding decision-making, predicting weather, and teaching young people how to manage risk. Trust, coordination, and shared responsibility were the backbone of survival during the harsh months. Daily routines adjusted to winter's challenges. Morning tasks included tending fires, melting ice, and checking food and water. Midday involved hunting, ice fishing, or gathering firewood and other necessary materials. Afternoons were spent maintaining shelters, repairing clothing, and preparing meals. Evening activities centered on fire management, sharing knowledge, and planning for potential emergencies. This structure ensured efficiency, safety, and energy conservation throughout the day. Food preservation was critical for long-term survival. Meat was stored near the fire to prevent freezing solid, while remaining safe from spoilage. Fish was dried or smoked and stored in cool locations within shelters. Roots and preserved plants were carefully monitored to ensure they remained edible. Sharing food reinforced community bonds, ensuring that everyone, including children embers and injured members, had enough to sustain themselves through periods of scarcity. Hunting strategies during winter were adapted to conserve energy. Snow made movement slow and exhausting, so hunters planned routes carefully. Prey animals moved differently, often seeking shelter from cold winds or congregating near scarce water sources. Hunters observed these patterns, using stealth and patience rather than speed. Even small successes were significant, providing food and materials that contributed to the group's overall survival. Fishing required constant vigilance. Holes in ice had to be cut carefully, and ice thickness was monitored to avoid accidents. Hunters adjusted fishing strategies to water depth, currents, and fish behavior. Children assisted safely, carrying small catches or preparing bait, gradually building skills they would need as adults. Ice fishing was not only a source of nutrition, but also a way to maintain movement skill and attention to the environment during long winter days. Water management continued to influence winter survival. Melted ice and snow provided drinking water, but it had to be handled carefully to prevent freezing or contamination. Water sources were monitored, and children learned to recognize safe ice or snow for consumption. Access to water also influenced camp placement, as it was critical for cooking, preserving food, and maintaining hygiene. Travel during winter was limited but necessary. Hunting trips, food gathering excursions, and relocation to winter shelters required careful planning. Snow, ice, and cold made travel slow and dangerous. Sleds pulled by dogs or reindeer carried supplies, while humans on snowshoes navigated frozen terrain. Groups moved together for safety, using knowledge of terrain and predator activity to minimize risk. Observation of predators intensified during winter. Wolves, bears, and smaller carnivores were constantly monitored. Tracks, sounds, and signs of feeding were studied daily. Dogs were used as alert systems, while fires, noise, and camp placement acted as deterrents. People learned to anticipate predator behavior, avoiding dangerous encounters whenever possible. Vigilance was essential for safety during both daytime activities and nighttime rest. Children's education became practical survival training. They participated in safe tasks like fire tending, carrying water, assisting with food preparation, and observing the environment. They learned to recognize animal tracks, read weather signs, maintain clothing, and navigate terrain safely. Gradually, children developed competence in essential skills, ensuring the continuity of survival knowledge for future generations. Community cooperation reached its highest importance in winter. Adults performed labor-intensive tasks such as hunting, fishing, preserving food, repairing shelters, and tending fires. Children assisted safely while continuing their education. Elders advised on weather, predator patterns, and resource allocation. Coordination, trust, and shared effort ensured that survival strategies were executed efficiently, reducing risk and conserving energy. Daily routines were structured to maintain efficiency and safety. Mornings included checking fires, melting ice, inspecting food stores, and preparing clothing. Midday was devoted to hunting, ice fishing, gathering firewood, or repairing shelters. Afternoons focused on tool maintenance, food preservation, and shelter reinforcement. Evenings involved communal meals, fire management, and sharing about predators, weather, and survival strategies. Consistency in routines preserved both physical and mental health. Clothing maintenance remained a constant task. Furs, skins, boots, gloves, and hats were inspected daily and repaired immediately. Layering allowed individuals to adjust warmth according to activity levels, preventing sweating that could lead to dangerous freezing. Attention to clothing was as critical as food or fire in winter survival. Fire management required constant vigilance. Fires provided warmth, cooking capability, protection from predators, and light during long winter nights. Firewood reserves were carefully managed and embers preserved to allow quick ignition. Fires also acted as communal gathering points, reinforcing social bonds and providing a sense of security. Observation of the environment guided all winter activity. Weather changes, animal behavior, and the presence of predators were monitored continuously. Subtle signs, like the movement of birds or shifts in wind, informed decisions about travel, hunting, and shelter placement. Children learned to notice these signs, building their observational skills and preparing them for future survival responsibilities. Predator management remained a priority. Wolves, bears, and lynx were monitored constantly. Dogs, fires, noise, and strategic shelter placement were employed to reduce risk. Groups avoided solitary travel when possible, and hunting expeditions were coordinated to ensure safety. Anticipating predator behavior was as important as managing food or fire in winter survival. Food management was critical. Stored meat, fish, and plants were monitored daily. Fresh hunting supplemented winter stores, but energy conservation remained a priority. Sharing food ensured that vulnerable members, children, elders, and injured individuals, were protected. Efficient management of limited resources allowed the tribe to survive long periods of scarcity and extreme cold. Nighttime routines focused on safety, warmth, and vigilance. Fires were maintained throughout the night, and designated community members kept watch for predators. Children slept near adults or in central areas for protection. Sleeping arrangements were designed to conserve warmth while allowing quick response if danger approached. Nighttime vigilance was essential for survival in regions where predators were active even in extreme cold. As winter deepened, snow covered the forests and plains in thick, unbroken layers. The wind became sharper, cutting across the open land, and blizzards could appear suddenly, reducing visibility to almost nothing. These storms were among the greatest challenges for the Siberian tribes. Survival depended not only on preparation, but also on experience, discipline, and careful attention to both the environment and community. Blizzards were approached caution and strict routines. When clouds darkened the sky and wind patterns shifted, people recognized the signs early. Fires were reinforced, shelters were checked for insulation, and extra layers of clothing were prepared. Everyone in the community understood the importance of staying together during storms. Moving through a blizzard alone could be deadly, as temperatures dropped rapidly, and the risk of becoming lost or disoriented was high. During blizzards, outdoor activity was minimized. Hunting and gathering were temporarily suspended unless absolutely necessary. Movement was restricted to essential trips, usually to gather firewood or check the condition of traps and shelters nearby. Children stayed close to adults, learning the careful routines of safety while observing the impact of the storm on the landscape. Every step in these conditions required thought, as snowdrifts could conceal dangerous terrain or frozen water hazards. Shelters were critical during storms. Permanent winter dwellings were heavily insulated with earth, wood, and multiple layers of animal skins. Temporary shelters used for hunting trips were reinforced with additional coverings, and snow itself was sometimes used to strengthen walls against wind. Interiors were arranged to maximize warmth. Fire pits were carefully managed to maintain heat without consuming oxygen in enclosed spaces. People huddled together for shared warmth, and animals, especially dogs, were brought inside to provide both comfort and alertness against predators. Fires were maintained constantly during winter storms. Small, controlled flames were kept in multiple locations within shelters to ensure warmth throughout long nights. Ember preservation was critical. If a fire went out during a storm, rebuilding it in the freezing wind could be impossible. Smoke was carefully managed to prevent suffocation while still deterring predators from approaching the shelter. Fire provided not only physical warmth, but also a sense of security in otherwise harsh conditions. Predators became more aggressive in deep winter. Wolves, bears, and lynx were driven by hunger, often venturing closer to human settlements or hunting grounds. Wolves traveled in packs, capable of attacking in coordinated ways, while bears, though slower in deep snow, could be dangerous when scavenging or disturbed. People relied on a combination of dogs, fire, and elevated or enclosed shelterment to minimize risk. Nighttime vigilance was heightened, with designated watchers ensuring that the community could respond quickly to any threat. Hunting during winter required extreme skill and caution. Snow made movement slow and energy-consuming, so hunters carefully chose routes and timed excursions for maximum efficiency. Prey animals moved differently in deep snow, often congregating near open water or sheltered areas. Tracking these animals required careful attention to footprints, droppings, and broken branches. Patience was essential. Hunters could spend hours following a single trail to find food, knowing that failure could have consequences for the entire community. Ice fishing was adapted to winter conditions. Frozen rivers and lakes required careful assessment before cutting holes. Hunters monitored ice thickness and used specialized tools to reach the water below. Fishing lines, nets, and spears were maintained for durability in extreme cold. Fish provided an essential source of protein and fat, and it was often preserved immediately to ensure survival through months of scarcity. Children assisted safely, learning techniques gradually under adult supervision. Water management in winter involved both melting snow and accessing liquid water beneath ice. Collecting snow was labor-intensive, but sometimes necessary when rivers were frozen. Melted snow was carefully boiled or filtered when possible to ensure safety. Children learned to recognize safe ice, avoid hidden cracks, and handle water collection efficiently. Reliable water sources were critical for cooking, hydration, and maintaining hygiene in a landscape where dehydration could be sudden and dangerous. Food preservation reached its most critical stage during winter. Meat, fish, roots, and berries stored from summer and autumn were carefully monitored. Freshly hunted animals were prepared immediately, with meat dried, smoked, or stored in insulated areas to prevent freezing too hard or spoiling. Storage techniques included hanging food near warmth but away from direct heat, using natural cool spots in shelters, or packing in layers of insulating materials like leaves and skins. Even small mistakes could result in wasted resources, so attention was constant. Daily routines in deep winter were shaped around survival priorities. Mornings began with tending fires, checking food stores, and inspecting shelters for damage from snow or wind. Midday, if weather allowed, was devoted to essential hunting, ice fishing, or gathering firewood. Afternoons were spent repairing tools, maintaining clothing, and reinforcing shelter walls. Evenings involved communal meals, tending fires, monitor for predators, and sharing knowledge about environmental changes. Consistency in routines ensured that energy was preserved and tasks completed efficiently. Clothing became a matter of life and death. Thick layers of furs, insulated gloves, boots, and hats were worn constantly. Multiple layers allowed people to adjust warmth based on activity level and weather. Wet clothing from snow or ice was immediately dried near the fire, as even brief exposure to cold, wet conditions could result in frostbite. Knowledge of proper layering, insulation, and drying techniques was passed down through generations. Children were trained early to dress appropriately, understanding how mistakes could be dangerous. Observation of predators intensified during winter. Wolves traveled silently in the snow, bears scavenged in search of food, and lynx roamed forests hunting small animals. People watched tracks carefully, listened for sounds, and observed the behavior of prey animals as indicators of predator activity. Dogs were trained to alert humans to approaching danger, while fires and human activity served as deterrents. Groups rarely traveled alone, knowing that predators were more likely to attack isolated individuals. Nighttime routines were crucial in Siberian winter. Darkness arrived early and lasted long hours, reducing visibility and increasing the risk of predator attacks. Fires were maintained continuously, and designated watchers monitored the surroundings. Children slept near adults or central locations for protection. Shelter layouts were designed for warmth, access to fire, and rapid response if predators approached. Even small lapses in vigilance could have serious consequences. so routines were disciplined and consistent. Blizzards required special strategies. During intense snowstorms, travel ceased entirely, and all outdoor activity was minimized. Shelters were reinforced with additional coverings or snow packed around walls to prevent drafts. Fires were maintained for warmth and cooking, but smoke was carefully managed to avoid suffocation. Community members stayed close together, providing shared warmth and safety. Predators often became more active during storms, so vigilance was maintained even when visibility was almost zero. Community cooperation was critical for winter survival. Adults hunted, fished, preserved food, maintained shelters, repaired clothing, and managed fires. Children assisted safely and learned essential skills through observation and guided practice. Elders advised on weather patterns, predator activity, and efficient allocation. Coordination, trust, and shared responsibility ensured that the tribe could navigate the harshest months safely. Hunting and predator strategies were carefully balanced. Wolves traveled in packs, often hunting in areas where prey congregated near water or shelter. People set traps, maintained strategic routes, and worked in groups to maximize safety and efficiency. Bears, though less aggressive in deep snow, could threaten humans if disturbed near food sources or dens. Knowledge of predator habits and territory allowed humans to minimize encounters while securing essential resources. Children's survival education was continuous and practical. They assisted with fire management, carrying water, maintaining clothing, monitoring food supplies, and observing predator behavior. They learned to recognize animal tracks, read weather signs, navigate snowy terrain safely, and respond to emergency situations. This hands-on education ensured that knowledge of winter survival would be passed down reliably through generations. Food management was constant. Stored meat, fish, and plants were monitored to prevent freezing too hard, spoilage, or theft by predators. Fresh hunting supplemented stores, but energy conservation remained essential. Sharing food reinforced social bonds, ensured vulnerable members survived, and allowed the community to manage scarcity collectively. Efficiency and careful rationing were vital for long-term survival in harsh conditions. Travel was limited but essential. Hunting trips, ice fishing, or checking distant shelters required careful planning and teamwork. Groups moved together to reduce the risk from predators and to navigate snow-covered terrain efficiently. Sleds and snowshoes were maintained for travel, and dogs were used to carry supplies or alert the group to danger. Knowledge of the landscape and predator behavior guided every journey. Observation of the environment guided all winter decisions. Weather patterns, animal movements, and predator activity were monitored constantly. Subtle changes in wind, cloud formations, or animal behavior signaled approaching storms, scarcity of prey, or potential danger. Children were trained to notice these signs and report them, reinforcing their understanding of survival principles. Winter in Siberia was relentless. Snow fell continuously, sometimes in soft, drifting flurries, sometimes in violent, freezing blizzards that obscured everything in white. The wind howled across the open plains and through forests, and temperatures dropped far below what would be safe without careful preparation. For the tribes who called this land home, survival depended on knowledge, routine, and community discipline. Blizzards were the greatest test. When clouds darkened and the wind shifted, people immediately recognized the warning signs. Shelters were reinforced, extra layers of clothing were prepared, and families stayed close together. Children were taught not to panic, to stay warm, and to trust the routines that had kept generations alive. Even small mistakes, straying from the shelter, neglecting clothing, or mismanaging fire, could be fatal. During storms, outdoor activity was severely limited. Hunting and gathering were suspended unless absolutely necessary. The only movements allowed were those required to maintain firewood, check traps or shelters nearby, or ensure that food and water supplies remained safe. Groups moved together, often in silence, using hand signals or subtle cues to communicate. Visibility could drop to near zero, and snowdrifts could conceal hazards like thin ice or hidden ravines. Every step required caution. Shelters were lifelines during winter. Permanent winter dwellings were insulated with layers of earth, logs, and thick animal hides. Entrances were sometimes partially blocked with snow to prevent drafts and wind. Interiors were arranged around central fire pits, with sleeping areas placed to maximize warmth and safety. Temporary shelters for hunting trips were reinforced with extra coverings, and snow was often packed around walls for insulation. The goal was simple: maintain warmth, reduce exposure, and protect the group from both predators and the elements. Fires were maintained continuously during winter. They provided warmth, cooking capability, protection from predators, and a source of light during long nights. Embers were preserved carefully so that if the main fire went out, it could be reignited quickly. Smoke was managed to avoid suffocation while still deterring predators. Community members rotated tasks to ensure that fires remained strong, especially during storms or nights of extreme cold. Predators were a constant threat. Wolves traveled in packs, seeking prey weakened by snow and cold. Bears, though less mobile in deep snow, could attack if provoked or hungry. Lynx and smaller carnivores scavenged quietly, often in proximity to human settlements. The tribes relied on a combination of dogs, fire, and strategic shelter placement to reduce risk. Nighttime watches were routine, and movement outside shelters after dark was minimal and always in groups. Hunting was adapted for winter conditions. Snow made travel slow and energy-consuming, so hunters carefully selected routes, timed trips according to prey behavior, and conserved energy. Prey animals moved differently, often concentrating near open water or sheltered forest areas. Tracking footprints in fresh snow was a critical skill, as was recognizing signs of predators that might be nearby. Patience was essential. Even short hunting excursions could last hours, and success could mean the difference between comfort and hunger for the group. Ice fishing was critical. Thick ice covered rivers and lakes, requiring careful assessment before cutting holes. Hunters monitored ice thickness constantly, using simple tools to fish safely through openings. Fish were preserved immediately, as even freezing temperatures could make handling difficult over time. Children assisted safely by carrying bait, observing, and helping with storage. Ice fishing provided a reliable source of protein and fat during months when other prey was scarce. Water management remained essential. Melted snow provided drinking water, but ice had to be handled carefully to avoid accidents. Water was boiled or filtered when possible, and safe sources were mapped for future use. Children were trained to recognize reliable ice and snow, avoiding dangerous areas that could lead to injury or hypothermia. Access to water affected shelter placement, travel decisions, and daily routines. Food management was constant and meticulous. Meat, fish, berries, and roots were stored in insulated areas, monitored to prevent freezing too solid or spoiling. Fresh hunting supplemented stored food, but energy conservation remained critical. Sharing resources ensured that vulnerable members, children, elders, and injured adults, remained fed. Efficient rationing and careful preservation allowed the community to survive for months under extreme conditions. Daily routines were shaped by survival priorities. Mornings began with tending fires, checking food and water, inspecting shelters, and dressing carefully. Midday was devoted to hunting, ice fishing, or maintaining firewood and shelters. Afternoons were spent repairing tools, clothing, or temporary shelters. Evenings focused on communal meals, maintaining warmth, monitoring predators, and planning for emergencies. Every routine was deliberate, designed to conserve energy, preserve life, and maintain order. Clothing maintenance was constant. Thick layers of gloves, boots, gloves, and hats were inspected daily. Tiers were repaired immediately, wet items dried near fire, and layering adjusted for activity. Children learned the importance of proper insulation early, understanding that mistakes could quickly become dangerous. Warmth was as vital as food or shelter, and clothing habits were taught carefully from generation to generation. Observation of predators intensified in winter. Wolves moved silently across snowfields, often tracking human prey. Bears scavenged near shelters or frozen rivers. Smaller carnivores looked for signs of food near stored resources. Dogs were alert, fire acted as a deterrent, and strategic shelter placement minimized risk. Groups moved together, rotated watches at night, and planned all outdoor activities with predator behavior in mind. Nighttime routines were especially critical. Darkness arrived early and lasted long hours, reducing visibility and increasing the risk from predators. Fires were maintained, and designated watchers monitored the surroundings. Children slept near adults or in central areas for safety. Shelter layouts ensured that everyone could stay warm while still allowing rapid response to predators or emergencies. Vigilance was essential. One mistake at night could have dire consequences. Blizzards required special strategies. When storms were severe, all movement ceased. Shelters were reinforced with extra coverings or snow walls. Fires were carefully tended, and the community stayed close together for shared warmth. Predators became more active during storms, so vigilance was maintained. Families relied on routine knowledge and trust to survive these periods of intense cold and limited visibility. Travel in winter was carefully planned and executed only when necessary. Hunting trips, ice fishing, and checking remote shelters required coordination, careful observation, and use of dogs or sleds. Groups moved together to reduce risk, navigating snow-covered terrain efficiently. Knowledge of landmarks, terrain features, and predator behavior guided every journey. Mistakes could lead to disorientation, frostbite, or dangerous encounters. Children's survival education continued through hands-on tasks. They learned to tend fires, carry water, maintain clothing, monitor food stores, recognize animal tracks, read weather signs, and navigate safely. Practical experience, combined with observation of adults, ensured that knowledge of winter survival was passed reliably from generation to generation. Community cooperation reached its highest importance in winter. Adults focused on hunting, fishing, preserving food, maintaining shelters, repairing clothing, and managing fire. Children assisted safely while learning skills. Elders advised on weather, predator patterns, and resource management. Coordination, shared effort, and trust ensured that all tasks were completed efficiently and safely, allowing the community to survive harsh conditions. Predator strategies were precise. Wolves and bears were tracked constantly, their movements anticipated. Dogs alerted humans to danger, while fires and shelter placement acted as deterrents. Hunting was conducted in groups, with safety as a priority. Even in extreme cold or blizzard conditions, humans understood the balance between risk and necessity, adjusting their strategies based on observation and experience. Food was monitored constantly. Stored supplies were inspected, fresh hunting supplemented reserves, and rationing ensured survival for the most vulnerable. Preservation techniques were critical, with meat, fish, and plants stored in insulated areas, dried or smoked. Children learned how to store food safely, ensuring that future generations maintained these survival practices. Nighttime vigilance involved rotations of community members keeping watch, maintaining fire, and monitoring for predators. Sleeping arrangements were planned to maximize warmth and safety, ensuring rapid response if threats approached. Even small lapses in vigilance could have serious consequences, so routines were disciplined, organized, and consistent. Blizzards, deep snow, and extreme cold defined the daily experience. The tribes adapted by maintaining constant fire, carefully observing predators, traveling only when necessary, and following strict routines. Knowledge of animal behavior, weather signs, terrain, and survival strategies allowed the group to thrive even in harsh conditions. Children observed and participated, learning skills that ensured the continuity of survival knowledge. By winter's end, the tribes had survived months of snow, blizzards, and predators. Food stores had been carefully managed, shelters maintained, fires kept alive, and routines followed meticulously. Children had learned essential survival skills, predators had been managed effectively, and the community had stayed cohesive and safe. The arrival of spring would bring new opportunities, but the lessons of winter, patience, observation, preparation, and cooperation, remained ingrained in every member of the tribe. As spring slowly returned to Siberia, the snow began to melt, rivers flowed again, and the land stirred with life. The tribes had endured months of bitter cold, blizzards, and the constant presence of predators. They survived through careful preparation, constant observation, strict routines, and deep cooperation within their communities. Food stores were preserved, shelters maintained, fires kept burning, and every member, young and old, had contributed to survival. The lessons of winter, patience, vigilance, and harmony with the environment remained ingrained, guiding the tribe into the new season. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something new about how Siberian tribes lived and survived, and perhaps felt a little more relaxed as you imagined their calm, careful routines. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more calming history tales, and remember, every season teaches us patience and resilience.